Rico Omar Harris. Rico Omar Harris was an outgoing, athletic, and once awardedly world-renowned basketball prodigy went by simply Rico to the basketball community and those who followed his career. All those who knew him, from Los Angeles college basketball fans to the Harlem Globetrotters, were left searching for answers in a deluge of evidence that left us all in disbelief. His dynamic and entertaining skill set, brave battle against addiction, and apparent recovery were cut short by an unexplainable, untraceable disappearance in February. This left us all hoping to provide more substantial reasoning based on observable evidence and situational analysis. This explores the mystery of Rico Harris's disappearance in Yolo County and the hills around Cache Creek. Henry Harris and Margaret Fernandez welcomed Rico Harris into the world on May 19, 1977, in Los Angeles, California. The Harris family immediately grew close to one another after briefly relocating to Oregon to accommodate Henry's new career, but they soon returned to Los Angeles to raise 3 more children. The Harris brothers experienced violent and abusive tendencies from their father when they were youngsters. In particular, Rico was frequently the object of Henry's wrath, bearing the brunt of his insults even as he matured into a teenager who yearned for his praise. Margaret finally lost patience with Henry's collision course and moved to Alhambra, California with her kids. The oldest brother, Rico, took it upon himself to provide for the family, and he took care of his siblings while Margaret worked a full-time job. Rico chose to pursue acting at the age of 15, despite his parents' advice that he employ his large stature in sports. He made the difficult decision to drive all the way from Alhambra to Hollywood High School in order to increase his prospects of success. Rico, however, only realizes after a year that he was meant to be a basketball player, and he uses his father's address to enroll in Temple City High School. Rico was an enormous young guy, standing 6 feet 8 inches tall and weighing a pound 250 when he was 16 years old. He quickly established himself as the dominant player on the basketball floor, overwhelming his opponents and thrilling the spectators with his fast-paced performance. Inspired by Magic Johnson, he turned a once-dormant high school club into a formidable program that attracted college scouts as he exploited double-team defenses. He was an introspective teenager with little academic ability off the court until he found a girlfriend whose family encouraged him to get better grades. Rico was able to achieve even more success in basketball as a result. In his final year, he averaged 28 points and 15 rebounds, and he was compared to some of the best recruits in the Western United States like Paul Pierce and Jason Terry. Rico regrettably lost out on scholarship offers from prestigious colleges like UCLA since he didn't score well on the SAT. Rico had to enroll in school at Arizona State in order to be eligible to play basketball again. Rico struggled in his schoolwork and social life since he was away from his close-knit family and friends for the first time in his life. Along with 2 other teammates, Rico was temporarily charged with unlawful imprisonment in March 1996. However, the charges were then dropped, and Rico was informed that he would need to sit out a second year of sports in order to clean up his act. Rico transferred to Los Angeles City College because he could not bear to lose any more valuable time. He was able to sign on with the basketball squad and make himself known right away. While still playing at a high level on the basketball court, Rico led the LACC clubs to a state championship and was named Most Valuable Player. However, by his sophomore year, he was falling behind psychological growth, and he filed for the NBA draft when he broke up with his previous fiancée and realized his mental health was failing. Again, though, this plan was doomed to fail as Rico continued to put off important occasions to display his abilities in order to be near to home. Consequently, he declined multiple East Coast offers to play Division I College War, withdrew his name from draft consideration, and transferred to Cal State Northridge. Many people believed it was a bad decision for Rico's future professional life, and sadly, they were right. Rico tried to make amends with his father Henry during the summer break between semesters, but he was quickly turned down. Rico's lone bad season at CS Northridge was spent in a purgatory of social and emotional neglect, where he lost interest in the NBA and continued to lose focus. Rico turned to semi-professional basketball as soon as he was eligible for college in order to pursue his NBA goal. Before choosing to sign with the hilarious demonstration basketball team, the Harlem Globetrotters, he played for pickup teams in San Diego, St. Louis, and other places. Just 1 month into the Globetrotters gig, Rico tragically found himself in a brawl in South LA, where he was struck in the back of the head by a baseball bat. Baseball player was effectively ended by headaches and balance problems. Rico battled alcoholism for 7 years before spiraling out of control and turning to heroin, meth, and cocaine after returning to Alhambra with his mother and siblings. Actually, Margaret Harris, the siblings' mother, did everything in her power to support them while they battled their demons of substance misuse. All of the Harris siblings suffered from some form of addiction. Rico attended treatment after turning 30 years old in February 2007 in an attempt to get relayed. Although the program took longer than expected, Rico was able to overcome his addiction in the end. He got into a love connection with Jennifer Odum, a Seattle insurance broker, in February 2012. Over the course of the following few years, Rico and Jennifer grew close. After a while, Rico made a permanent relocation to Seattle and began preparing for a married life with Jennifer. The two discussed starting a family and creating a bright future. Rico even managed to set up an interview for a position as a property appraiser, a remarkable chance in light of everything he had to overcome. But Rico had to return to Alhambra once more in order to achieve closure with his family before he could complete the metamorphosis. If you're fascinated by true crime and enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up to stay updated on all our latest content. On October 9, 2014, he had supper with his brother, and gave him a brand new smartphone. Rico then went to see his mother and had a private one-on-one chat. It's unclear what came of the exchange, but it's thought to have gone against Rico's intentions. Just after midnight, Rico left again for Seattle, making his last stop at Lodi, California. That was the last time anyone saw Rico Harris before he vanished into the North Sacramento wilderness. Early in September 2014, Rico and Jennifer, his girlfriend, enjoy a close, hopeful relationship and start discussing their future together. But Jennifer senses that something is wrong with Rico because he acts strangely and becomes disorganized. Rico admits he stopped drinking during the February after she keeps asking him questions. Jennifer felt unbalanced by the reversion to an old behavior, even though it hadn't become a habit yet. David Lara, a long-standing buddy who had renewed their acquaintance at the same time, confirms Rico's relapse. Despite their prior disagreement, Rico and Jennifer decided to move in together in Seattle, Washington, later in September to further their love. For Rico, who has previously struggled while separated from his close-knit family and city of Los Angeles, it is considered a huge undertaking. The pair had deep talks about getting married, starting a family, and discovering genuine love, but Rico is still uneasy in his new environment. Rico takes nearly a month to unpack because he felt uneasy settling into a place that wasn't his own. Jennifer claims that rather than lingering doubts or laziness, Rico's sensitive underlying will to support loved ones was what fueled the insecurity. Things start to improve in the October. Rico has an interview with a nearby real estate company to work as a property assessor. Rico ultimately unpacks his possessions in Jennifer's home, a statement that he's ready for change and that he intends to stay in Seattle since the new opportunity brings him happiness and encouragement. On October 8, 2014, the happy mood abruptly changed when Rico told Jennifer that he was going to explore later in the day. This was unusual for Rico, but Jennifer didn't really think twice about it and said goodbye to her fiancé. Later that October 8th, when Jennifer called Rico, Rico told her that he was leaving for a visit with his family in Los Angeles. Rico explains that he wants to put his troubled childhood past behind him and rebuild his relationship and future with his mother. Though shocked, Jennifer accepts his hasty decision and understands his intentions. Jennifer recalls Rico appearing to be in the right frame of mind and sounded eager to move on. On October 9th, Rico arrives at Alhambra the following day. Margaret, his mother, saw his confidence about his flourishing life and his joy about the recent changes. Margaret believes Rico may have been under the influence of drugs or alcohol, though. On October 9th, Rico enjoys dinner with one of his younger brothers. After leaving his mother's house in the evening, he gets his brother a new phone, and the two share old memories. Rico returns to Margaret's home in Alhambra following the brothers' rekindling in order to have a private discussion and once more find the closure he longs for from a broken-up upbringing. The talk ends quickly, and Margaret says afterwards that she didn't feel Rico gained the emotional disclosure he had hoped for from it. Soon after Friday, October 10th, around midnight, Rico made the decision to return to Seattle instead of staying the night as his mother had anticipated, so he might have more time to prepare for his interview. He leaves his mother's house with a few additional personal items in tow. About 1 o'clock, Rico gives his mother another call to apologize for his hasty choice. Margaret remembers his kid saying something like, "I have things I need to get done." Rico contacts Jennifer immediately after speaking with his mother, shocking her once more with his early return home. After 3 or 4 hours of conversation, Jennifer suggests that Rico find a motel and get some rest because he has been awake for more than 40 hours. When Rico does turn around, he expresses the wish to take a little nap by driving up to the neighboring mountains. Jennifer offers an alternate route, telling him that the dark, winding roads would be hazardous in the middle of the night and that he wouldn't have mobile coverage at high altitude. When the two hang up, Rico is still determined to drive. After sleeping for a few hours on October 10th, Jennifer gives Rico another call. Rico tells her he's stopping at a petrol station in the Californian town of Lodi, which is close to Sacramento. On the other end of the phone, he sounds quite exhausted. About an hour later, Rico receives another call. This time, it's his mother inquiring about his well-being. Rico acknowledges his tiredness at last and says he will find a place to eat and relax. Jennifer and Margaret both contact Rico several times during the morning to inquire about his intentions for rest, but Rico never answers. Following several fruitless attempts, Jennifer texts him, 10:44 a.m. When Rico does text Jennifer at last, he claims he's doing well but doesn't go into much information. This concludes anyone's formal correspondence with Rico Harris. Jennifer attempts to give Rico some undisturbed downtime as the morning turns into the afternoon, but her nervousness overcomes her, and she phones him anyhow, still receiving no answer. Jennifer convinces herself that he must still be in the Californian mountains and that the phone service issue is to blame. Jennifer officially succumbs to Rico's quiet between 7 and 8 p.m. and phones Margaret with concern. Margaret, on the other hand, appears composed and surmises that Rico is simply acting independently, which is consistent with his nature. Rico appears to be singing inadvertently when he catches himself singing along to music in his parked automobile sometime before midnight. He also flings several CDs from the passenger side around. Later on, it is discovered that these videotapes have a timestamp from the evening of October 10th, proving he was still alive and able to operate at that point. Rico's phone shuts off at 11:15. It's unclear if Rico did it on purpose or if the battery died. Jennifer and Margaret wait to report it even if Rico doesn't return calls or travels back to Seattle on the weekend of October 12. The mobile phone, backpack, and overall significant case point definitely indicate that Rico was in trouble, if not from a third party, then at least from his own damaged and bruised self. In the Rico Harris case, the first and most widely discussed notion evolved into a convoluted, speculative tale of foul play. The Yolo County Sheriff's Department came up with the theory after discovering the Nissan abandoned and seemed to have been looted. Investigators discovered Rico's wallet, still full of items save for a Discovery credit card, was left behind in addition to the disarray of documents, CDs, and bottles in the back seat. The automobile had a dead battery and no gas, and it wasn't parked in any of the designated spots outside. Police determined that Rico made a mistake and traveled northeast on Route 16 after stopping for gas in Lodi, California. He stopped to relax at Cache Creek Park in Rumsey Canyon, let off steam, and eventually arrived in Baton with a third party. Investigators surmised that the gas had probably been siphoned in order to explain the car's problems. Beyond a few possible sightings, this explanation would also explain how a 6'8" and 300-pound man could fall through the cracks so effortlessly. That kind of man usually doesn't disappear unnoticed unless someone else helps them, drives them away, or does something really evil. The cell phone recordings show Rico sitting in an inactive car on October 10th, which further clouded the foul play theories when his backpack and footprints were found. It's probable that he juiced the batteries from prolonged use of the engine and the audio system, running out of gas. Rico may have allowed his car to run through the night of October 10th and into the weekend of October, as average cars may use 1.5 gallons of petrol per hour only in idle mode. It would also assist to explain why jumper cables were in Rico's hands and why the car's interior was a complete disaster. The tracks along Route 16 suggested that Rico traveled along the highway to flag down people, which suggests that he was likely looking for someone to help jump his battery. Additionally, there were no DNA results to support the presence of a stranger or third-party interference. Therefore, investigators theorized that Rico had problems after hitchhiking along Route 16, even though he most definitely did not face foul play while in his automobile at Cache Creek. They think Rico was taken advantage of by someone or someone with criminal intent while he was strolling and chatting to anyone who would stop to help him. Rico was probably not in the best of moods that weekend, and if he appeared worn out or disoriented, his abductor might easily convince him to leave his backpack inside and get into the car. Why anyone would take the chance of interacting with a man who is virtually certain to have a physical advantage, not to mention carry no cash, is a little puzzling. It's important to keep in mind, though, that Rico relapsed not long before going missing. How likely would he have been convinced to take cocaine or other substances if someone had offered them to him? This person may be anyone, a possible assassin, a drug dealer, or someone who is desperate for a man of Rico's caliber. Sadly, other from sifting through locals with criminal histories, there are very few connections or links connected to the foul play scenario. Given the size of Northern California and the Sacramento region, there are almost endless possibilities. Many people also believe that Rico was attacked and captured by a huge predator or wild animal. There is a good variety of wildlife in Northern California, including ferocious animals like black bears, mountain lions, and rattlesnakes. Of course, a rattlesnake may bite and poison an unwary human. But if Rico had really been bitten, his body would have been discovered by multiple search parties or by helicopters hovering overhead. Despite their intimidating appearance, black bears are actually fairly kind and rarely engage with people, much less a big man the size of Rico. The mountain lion is the only species that makes sense, but it would take a very powerful cougar or pack of cougars to kill Rico and then carry his body into a habitat or habitation cave that is off-limits to people. In the arid stretch of Ramsey Canyon, the search revealed no blood or evidence of struggle. And once more, Rico's sheer size likely discouraged wild animals from approaching. Furthermore, given the time frame of his disappearance and the ongoing manhunt, if he did pass away in the wilderness, his body wouldn't have to bury itself beneath the surface and remain hidden. The final theory surrounding Rico centered on a staged disappearance and planned getaway. This plot highlights Rico's past indecisiveness and likely disappointment with the closure he was hoping to find upon his return to the Alhambra. The story's proponents contend that Rico decided it would be best to disappear without a trace and flee to a new location after realizing he no longer liked the life he had dreamed for in Seattle. According to the notion, Rico might have purchased a second phone to use for his escape, and his brother may have assisted him along the way. Rico also purchased a new cell phone for his brother. Rico chose to sneak out, citing his booked interview as justification, as his mother's talk became sour. Rico gradually cut up communication with his mother and girlfriend while traveling to Sacramento. He also took a diversion from Interstate 5 to Seattle and headed east to Cache Creek. He recorded himself acting agitated upon his arrival, possibly even staging a kidnapping or robbery. Rico left the car with his old phone and rucksack once the gas and electricity eventually ran out, looking as though he needed assistance with the jumper wires. Rico chose to create a distraction by leaving the backpack and phone behind as he flagged down a car to hitchhike. Some even claimed that the person who picked him up knew about his scheme and had a connection to both Rico's fake absence and his new life. Ultimately, there are a lot of contradictions in this notion. Rico had insisted to everyone he knew about how encouraging the chances were in Seattle. He had recently moved to Washington State, was in regular communication with Jennifer about getting married and starting a family, and had really settled in the missing Discovery credit card that was discovered missing from Rico's wallet, was also tracked by the police. Rico chose to sneak out, citing his booked interview as justification, as his mother's talk became sour. Rico gradually cut up communication with his mother and girlfriend while traveling to Sacramento. He also took a diversion from Interstate 5 to Seattle and headed east to Cache Creek. He recorded himself acting agitated upon his arrival, possibly even staging a kidnapping or robbery. Rico left the car with his old phone and rucksack once the gas and electricity eventually ran out, looking as though he needed assistance with the jumper wires. Rico chose to create a distraction by leaving the backpack and phone behind as he flagged down a car to hitchhike. Some even claimed that the person who picked him up knew about his scheme and had a connection to both Rico's fake absence and his new life. Ultimately, there are a lot of contradictions in this notion. Rico had insisted to everyone he knew about how encouraging the chances were in Seattle. He had recently moved to Washington State, was in regular communication with Jennifer about getting married and starting a family, and had really settled in the missing Discovery credit card that was discovered missing from Rico's wallet, was also tracked by the police. The account was never assessed or used after October 10th, indicating that if Rico escaped, the money he would almost certainly need to carry out such a scheme came from sources other than his own money. Considering the dexterity and inventiveness required to accomplish such a feat, the likelihood that Rico would not have staged the mental breakdown seen in the selfie films, and the coincidental difference in Rico's recent outlook on life. It is very unlikely that Rico would stay at his presentation and then flee. Prior to disclosing our theory regarding Rico's enigmatic disappearance, we would like to clarify that the conclusions we reached are entirely conjectural and grounded in factual subtext, evidence, and circumstances. We only have access to the same information that is shown in each video, and we just watch, investigate, and report, not attempting to make any firm or expert guarantees regarding the conclusions we draw at the end. In this instance, we think Rico kept abusing drugs due to intense psychological suffering and extreme fatigue. He also may have gotten lost on his way and ended up alone and unobserved in the wilderness, where he most likely perished while being concealed by the elements. Rico coped well throughout his life without having a loving, nurturing father. Rico internalized his passion of basketball and sought his father's praise despite the verbal and physical violence he experienced as a child. Rico never really distanced himself from Henry Harris, even after he and his siblings moved in with their mother. Rico exacerbated the simmering stress from a difficult upbringing when his basketball career faded and he turned to drugs and alcohol. Rico encountered his own father in jail following an arrest for public intoxication, further complicating the situation. Rico suffered psychologically from these humiliations and unresolved tensions. After he vanished, Jennifer discovered evidence of untreated melancholy, anxiety, and potentially bipolar disorder. Given his past mental health issues, a return to substance abuse, family issues, or other setbacks would have left Rico feeling hopeless on his drive back to Seattle. His heart and mind were permanently damaged when his attempts to make sense of his history failed and he was left with deep scars. As a result, wrong turn on his way up north, which led him into the mountains of northern Sacramento and into Ramsey Canyon. Rico then found an outlet for drugs and alcohol and picked some up between stopping for petrol in Lodi and parking in the lower area of Cache Creek Park. Hard drugs are known to be widely available in Sacramento in the surrounding areas, so a former addict could probably find them and buy them without too much difficulty. Rico either took the medications and then collected them or felt the full power of the negative effects after he parked. It's possible that he used methamphetamines or crack during the trip in any case. These stimulants would account for his extended periods of wakefulness. The Nissan Maxima's crucial hint, discovered after the car was towed into evidence by the police, provides the basis for the drug theory. Under the passenger seat, beneath the glove box, investigators found a bindle, a plastic wrap intended especially for drugs. Now, the bindle in question was empty and did not have any drug paraphernalia or residue in it, but it did suggest a recent tendency towards substance abuse. Additionally, 2 empty and half-full bottles of alcohol were discovered, both of which were assumed to have been consumed by Rico. Rico left the lower location and strolled along the highway guardrail after the car ran out of petrol and electricity. After leaving his phone and rucksack on the curb, he strolled over to the creek to cool off and get a drink. The search teams discovered his massive footprints there a few days later. Rico spent some time by the lake before discovering a quicker route up the hill to return to the road, a location that was distinct from the one where he'd left his possessions. Rico managed to hitchhike and find his way into a small town or place where he could freshen up and obtain food while he was still planning along Route 16. A pair of vagrants in Clear Lake California claimed to have seen Rico purchasing drugs in the region once, but they provided no other information or specifics to support their claims. This theory's final section is a bit hazy. It's entirely unclear with whom Rico interacts during the course of the following week, but he stays out of the spotlight and goes back to Ramsey Canyon's lower side, where his car was parked on October 19th. This evening, there was a report of a large African-American male being seen traveling in that direction. Additional footprints in the vicinity by the police corroborated the allegation. Rico was most likely dumped off so he could get back to his car, but when he saw it had been taken away, he either chose to stay in his newfound freedom and march into the woods, or he went back to the original automobile. The real enigma lies in what transpired after. Rico was noticeable, as was already said, and his profile made it difficult to blend in. Perhaps he fell into a valley or sinkhole that hid him from searchers. Perhaps he committed suicide in a remote area of the untamed trees. Whatever the specifics, Rico Harris was struggling with problems that none of us can comprehend or overlook. Whether it was anxiety and drug usage combined with sleep deprivation, a melancholy episode brought on by previous events, or something else entirely, Rico wasn't acting normally. His careless actions in the cell phone films demonstrate this, as well as regrettably casting a dark cloud on his which has tarnished Rico's reputation and clouded the public's view of the case. It is important to clarify that Rico was a kind and considerate person despite his drug abuse. He is not any more of a bad guy than you or I, and he deserves the same amount of attention as any other missing person. The stigma of addiction will be damned. Addiction is a mental and physical illness that can negatively impact one's emotional and physical well-being. Addicts fight not just against their illness, but also against the ongoing denigration of society and those who view addicts as failures due to their behavior. Rico Harris sought to be located. He was a brave man who bravely faced great suffering all of his life. After a perilous night, he at last saw the light at the end of the tunnel when dawn broke. He cherished his relationships with friends and family as well as changing people's lives. Rico had athletic talent, but he also had compassion. It only seems fitting that we return the favor in his honor, since he would have gone to unimaginable lengths to assist people in need. Let him not be remembered as a drug addict, missing person, or as a Harlem Globetrotter. Let his ultimate goal be to be a foster father and carer, a fighter, and a found father. Nikki Versstappen. The time for summer camp was drawing near, and Nikki Versstappen wasn't sure he wanted to go or not. He didn't travel the previous year because he was afraid of being homesick, and his parents were in favor of him staying at home. Summer times were spent at home in the southern Dutch town of Hebelioem by Nikki Verstappen's preference. In this manner, he could go see friends whenever he wanted, play games with Finn, his younger sister Kay, or cuddle and show his dog lots of love. Every time he left the house for summer camp, he would always miss his dog. Nikki Versstappen felt compelled to attend summer camp in 1998, despite his reservations about the idea. He sensed that he was no longer 10 years old. At 11 years old, he was maturing. He told his mother that he wasn't sure about summer camp, and she reassured him, telling him he would have a great time there. With his best friend attending as well, Nikki thought everything would work out. Nikki Versstappen finished packing his essentials after deciding to go, making sure to include his go-to red and white pajamas, official apparel from Fathikajak, his beloved Amsterdam soccer team. Given his fondness for all things related to Ajax emblem and colors, it was given to him as a Christmas present. Actually, from red to white, Nikki Verstappen's room was primarily decorated with Ajax elements. On the first day of summer camp, Nikki packed his things, took one last glance at his room, and headed out. Sadly, he would never again be able to view the poster of Jerry Litmanen that had been up against his room's wall. On March 13, 1987, Nikki Verstappen was born in Hebelheim, a district in Limburg, the Netherlands, to Peter and Bertie Verstappen. He was the oldest of 2 children and came from a loving home. Nikki enjoyed playing with Fimke, his younger sister. Living in a tiny town of 800, Nikki would regularly ride his bike around his hometown of Heibloem. This helped him become well known. He was regarded as a laid-back young man who was nice. He was also seen as a content and mature young man. His mother called him sporty and impulsive. It was difficult to think about Nikki Versstappen at the time without thinking of the Amsterdam football squad. Nikki was an ardent Ajax supporter who never missed a game. It was reported that Nikki was a skilled football player and that he had played the game himself. When the time came for the 8 to 12-year-olds' annual summer camp, Nikki Versstappen and 36 other students from his school boarded a bus and traveled to Brunsum, 45 minutes away from Hebblum, to attend the children's summer camp that was being held on the Dehi camping grounds on the Brunsummerheide. Every child in High Gluim was known to have the opportunity to attend this summer camp each year. Nikki Versstappen was a little let down when his best friend abruptly withdrew and made the decision to stay home, even though he had encouraged him to go. But Nikki made the decision to continue attending the summer program. He said goodbye to his pal and remained on the bus. When the kids arrived at the Dehi camping area, they were split up into their different tent groups. 10 tents were assigned to each of the 37 children, and the 12 camp leaders shared the 4 tents that remained. It was customary for each group at camp to give its tent a name. Their team was likewise called by the same name. Nikki Versstappen called his tent Nitriders, and he shared it with 4 other lads his age who were his buddies. The first day of summer camp was full of games and team-building exercises, just as his mother had promised. They all gathered around a campfire later that evening, when one of the leaders told spooky ghost stories. The camp leaders ate and drank until midnight, while the children were ordered to bed at around 10 o'clock. Summer camp got off to a wonderful start. Everyone went to bed in their tents for the night, excited for what was sure to be an amazing day filled with lots of fun activities scheduled for the next day. August 10, 1998, at around 5 in the morning. A tent mate of Nikki Versstappen awoke to use the loo. Nikki and the other tent mates were still asleep at that point. Another youngster from the Night Riders tent woke up at around 6 in the morning and discovered Nikki Versstappen was gone. Their first assumption was that he had used the loo. But when the trumpet for breakfast was blown 2 hours later at 8 in the morning, and Nikki was still nowhere to be seen, his other campers started to worry. Then, they reported to their camp authorities that Nikki had left their tent since 6 a.m. and had not come back. Searches for Nikki Versstappen spread across the campsite involving both camp officials and campers. They yelled out his name and looked everywhere for him, but he was nowhere to be seen. The leaders believed that Nikki Versstappen had run away because he had expressed doubt about attending summer camp. At that point, he called his parents in Hebblum to inform them that he had vanished from the campsite and that they were unable to find him. Nikki's parents were shocked to learn this. Bertie Versstappen, his mother, realized something wasn't quite right. She is aware that her son was anxious about leaving the house in the first place, and that he would never choose to leave the camp without telling anyone. That he would venture out on his own was absurd. In order to find their kid, Bertie and Peter hurriedly departed Hyberlum and made their way to the campsite. Nikki's shoes were still in the tent when Bertie arrived at the campsite. She received the impression that he would have worn his shoes if he had intended to flee. Nikki's parents then accompanied the camp leaders in their frantic search for their son, screaming out his name all throughout the campsite, but sadly, they got no response. By noon, they decided to give the cops a call. By later afternoon, the search party had expanded considerably. A large number of volunteers showed there, most of whom being friends and family from Hebblum and the nearby town of Brunson. They alternated between waiting at Nikki's tent and exploring the nearby fields and bushes to see whether Nikki was there. The search team searched desperately for Nikki. The police conducted extensive questioning of all the camp leaders and visited all the nearby residences to inquire if any inhabitants had maybe seen an 11-year-old boy, but they were unable to obtain any information. Despite the search party's lack of urgency, Nikki's family felt that something was badly wrong. All they could gather was that Nikki Versstappen had wandered off alone from the tent and lost his way through the forest. They expected him to be discovered alive and well and thought he was all right. It seemed that the search day was among the hottest of the entire 1998 summer. The 95-degree weather added to the exhaustion of the quest. While some camp counselors kept the children busy with activities, others took turns searching for Nikki. The children were ordered back to their tents as if nothing had happened, and in the evening, the military was called in to assist with the search. The searchers and military vehicles were calling Nikki's name wildly into the night as they slept. The camp leaders decided that if Nikki was still missing by Tuesday morning, there was no longer a need to camp if one of them went missing. They then made the decision to call off the camp. All the children were loaded onto a bus and sent back to Highball Limb, while search group continued to look farther. It became increasingly evident that Nikki Versstappen did not flee as they continued their search for him. Along with employing their canines, the police also deployed a plane to conduct an aerial search of the encampment. Nikki was nowhere to be found, and by dusk, the search group was running out of daylight. At last, on Tuesday, August 11, 1998, at approximately 9 o'clock at night, Nikki Verstappen's uncle, who was accompanying the search group, saw something lying behind a little pine tree. As he approached, he noticed 11-year-old Nikki Verstappen's lifeless body. Less than a mile from the campsite on the Schinwald Weg in Landgraf, Nikki was discovered in a pine wood. He was nude from the waist up, dressed in his red Ajax pajama trousers and blue knickers. He had taken his Christmas present from the previous year, a pair of pajamas trousers, and flipped them inside out, front to back. Although Nikki suffered a head wound, it did not initially appear to be severe enough to have contributed to his demise. Nikki had clean feet, even though he was discovered near farms and shrubs in a pine grove. It appeared that he did not stroll to the location where he was discovered. Many thought he had been killed someplace else and that his body had been transported to the location where he was discovered. Nikki Verstappen was discovered close to a parking area that was well known for being a meeting place for gay males to have covert sex. Apart from that, there was not much room to move. Nikki Verstappen's body was removed from the campsite around midnight and sent to a mortuary in Mastiac, which was roughly 30 minutes distant. The residents of High Blome united to help Nikki's family set together a memorial service. 1 week after Johnny left for summer camp on Saturday, August 15, 1998, there was a memorial service at High Blome Sports Fields. Given how well-known Nikki was in High Blome, 600 people showed out for his burial. At his funeral, his affection for Ajax was acknowledged. The red Ajax flag was draped over his coffin, something he would have cherished. His family was devastated and in a state of shock. They would never be the same. Nikki's parents felt bad about pushing their kid to attend summer camp, even though he had told them he didn't know what to expect from the trip. Nikki versus Stephen's killer? His family desired clarification and satisfaction. It was clear that someone had to be held responsible for the deaths of their brother and son, but the police had no leads at all. Upon realizing that Nikki was not likely to have left with an unknown person, the police conducted additional interviews with the camp leaders. Sadly, nothing was found that could shed light on the matter. Nikki was examined post-mortem 3 days after he passed away. Nikki's family was forced to wait 2 months for the autopsy results because he was killed during the summer during the holidays. Nikki Verstappen was drugged, and the post-mortem report claims that his body had evidence of sexual abuse. The medical examiner, however, was unable to ascertain the cause of death. As a result, a second autopsy was performed, and the findings were consistent with the first. Nikki may or may not have been sexually assaulted, but the cause of his death was unknown. There was insufficient evidence to conclusively prove that suffocation was the cause of his death, despite the suggestion that it was. After Nikki was killed, a thorough investigation was conducted, but the case went cold and would not be solved for 20 years. The proof that the police have to be used, a tissue with semen and a cigarette button and beer bottle cap were found at the parking lot, around 100 yards from where Nikki Verstappen was discovered. After that, the forensics put together a DNA profile of someone who wasn't Nikki. Though since individuals frequently met in the parking lot and had sex in the woods, it was not database in 1997, the same year that Nikki Verstappen was killed. DNA testing was the latest forensic technology at the time, and there were some limitations on the tests. Furthermore, the prosecutor and not the police might be in charge of any DNA testing that was done on the database. The police at the time lacked both their own database and direct access to the national database without the prosecutor's permission. This makes it more difficult and time-consuming to find a killer immediately. For the purpose of investigating Nikki Verstappen's murder, 40 men's DNA samples were collected. Among the guys were camp leaders, a few men from a nearby campsite, and other men who were visiting the region when Nikki passed away. But none of the DNA matched the profile identified in the crime scene tissue. The detectives were unable to rule out semen, even in the event that the tissue they had recovered was likely a remnant of a sexual encounter unrelated to Nikki's death. A single hair that matched Nikki's color was discovered camp commanders, which gave investigators optimism later on in the inquiry. However, it was found that the hair sample did not belong to Nikki after it was sent to the UK for DNA testing. The autopsy results were released right away. The first person of note was 80-year-old Jus Barton, who founded the camp where Nikki and his classmates attended. Nikki's former school principal in high blame was Jus Barton. Following his conviction for child sexual abuse in the 1950s, he lost his employment. He had also admitted during questioning that he had been close to Nikki Verstappen's tent on the morning of his disappearance, at 6 in the morning. He didn't go there for Nikki, though. He claimed that Jus Barton's alibi was that he cleaned his tent at 5 in the morning and went to see after the youngster who had burned his hand. He then made his way back to Hebloam to attend a friend's burial who had passed away. He returned immediately to the camp after claiming to have learnt about Nikki Verstappen's disappearance during the funeral. Due to his peculiar behavior during the pursuit of Nikki Verstappen, Jus Barton was under police scrutiny for a while. He continued to focus the search towards the location of Nikki's body. He further disclosed that men frequently get together for sex in the parking lot close to the crime scene. The police were uneasy with Jus Barton. They made the decision to investigate his past. Despite being a well-liked part of his community, he had been found guilty of child sexual assault and spent 3 months in jail before being released and permitted to work with children once more. Years later, pictures of him with young boys in his pants or without shirts were found, but at the time, there was no evidence that he had abused any more male children. But following Verstappen's passing, a 15-year-old girl came forward, claiming she had solid evidence that Jus Barton had abused her sexually during summer camp in 1998. One evening, she claimed to be sick, and Jus Barton had given her medication, which later turned out to be adult sleeping pills. She claimed that her garments were disorganized and not what they had been when she went to bed when she woke up. The girl also reported feeling uncomfortable and had pain in her lower abdomen. However, because she had not reported the incident to the police before, they were unable to take any action over her confession. Despite extensive questioning, Jus Barton was not able to be taken into custody because there was insufficient proof linking him to Nikki Verstappen's abduction and death. A 250,000 guilder prize was put up for any lead that would lead to the suspect's investigation into their son's murder. They turned to Peter de Vries, a well-known television crime reporter at the time, and requested him to assist them in unraveling the mystery surrounding the death of their son. Peter de Vries consented to assist them with their investigation. His intervention in the case proved to be Nikki's family's savior over time. On behalf of the Verstappen family, Peter de Vries started a campaign, and unidentified businessmen upped the reward money to 500,000 guilders. The first in-depth national documentary about Nikki's murder case aired in April 1999. The documentary discussed Jus Barton's previous history of sexually abusing children. It raised issues like why, as a convicted sex offender, he was still permitted to deal with children. The police appeared under pressure from the program to look into Jus Barton more thoroughly. This caused discord in Hippoim's small community. The case of Nikki posed a danger to the community's togetherness. Some favored Nikki's family's pursuit of the truth, even if it meant posing difficult questions, while others wished to shield the camp's creator. The bulk of high-blown residents eventually made the decision to avoid Nikki's family. The Verstappens, in their opinion, were on a witch hunt. Only a few devoted friends remained in Nikki's family, and they helped them through the legal proceedings. Nikki Verstappen's case was declared unresolved in July 1999. Bertie and Peter Verstappen had the chance to meet with Queen Beatrix, the former monarch of the Netherlands, in August of the following year. They gave her a letter with an official grievance on the inadequate inquiry into their son's death. As a result, the Maastricht prosecutor later increased attempts to resolve the case. At the location where Nikki's body was discovered in February 2001, the town of Brunson and Nikki's grandparents quietly erected a monument in honor of him. Nikki's parents were not comforted by this. As soon as he woke up every morning, his mother Berthy would light a candle in their house. She spent 20 years doing this. She said, "I wake up at night and hear his voice. In an interview with Peter de Vries, he gives me a call. I get up and head to where Nikki might be, but he's not there anymore." Their once whole and content family of 4 had collapsed into an unhappy, fragmented, and fractured family of 3. Unabated, Berthy had vowed on national television to bring her child's killer to justice for as long as she lived, even if at the time she was not receiving any answers. Berthy and Peter Verstappen asked for assistance in their son's case in a public letter to the Minister of Justice in February 2001. They have no solutions, but they say they are powerless over the legal and police establishments. Subsequently, the legal system took action since it seemed that the residents of Heibelbaum had completely lost faith in one another. The public was growing increasingly dissatisfied with the legal and police systems for failing to provide an explanation for Nikki Verstappen's death. The case was reopened that year, and it was entrusted to a task force seeking a second view to look into from the beginning. The investigative team was able to pinpoint Nikki's death time on June 29, 2001. It was speculated that he passed sometime between 2 p.m. and 9 a.m. on August 10th or August 11th. It indicates that before he was killed, Nikki Verstappen was alive for at least 8 hours. Furthermore, the use of new DNA technology revealed the presence of tiny blood droplets on Nikki's pajamas. After testing one of the drips for foreign DNA, it was discovered to be Nikki's. Subsequent inquiry turned out numerous errors committed by the initial team of investigators, which caused the case to be cold for a while. One of the errors made by these detectives was concentrating on the location where Nikki was discovered. Ignoring the fact that Nikki's clean feet indicated he did not walk there on his own, they used that location as the crime site. He was removed from the primary crime scene and disposed of where he had been discovered. Nikki was discovered in a pine tree, and no further evidence was sought during the initial investigation. Not even the campsite where Nikki was last seen was given due consideration as a potential source of information that could identify the murderer. Just Barton was not the only suspect in the crime, as the investigation reveals. Nikki and his buddies appear to have been camping in 1998 when another group from Roldock Seminary set up tents nearby. The cops were interested in a man named Roldock's cook because he had previously made inappropriate contact with a youngster. They thought he was someone who would carry it out once more. Rold Chef wasn't at the campsite the morning that Nikki Versstappen vanished. He didn't seem to have an explanation for his location at the time when questioned. But he passed away in 1999 before the authorities had sufficient proof to make an arrest. There was also another person of interest at the time, a man simply known as VYM. VYM was a local town's sexual offender. On August 10, 1998, he was seen by several witnesses driving a dark-colored car close to the Highcop campsite. In the years February 2003, 2006, and February 2007, he was questioned by the police whenever a witness came forward and implicated him. Sadly, there was insufficient proof to link him to the crime, and he passed away in February 2007 at the age of 64. Vim had maintained till his passing that he had never killed Verstappen. In this case, the police could not afford to ignore the German serial killer Martini. Between 1992 and February 2001, he had sexually abused at least 40 minoteurs and killed 3 boys. Because of his penchant for donning eerie black masks and black attire, Martinet was also referred to as the Masked Man or the Black Man. He typically hunted his victims at children's homes or at campgrounds. Ney was seen as a major suspect as the Highcop campsite was near the Dutch-German border, and one of his proven offenses was done in the Netherlands. Martinet, however, denied having anything to do with the death of Nikki Verstappen when he was finally taken into custody in February 2001 for all of his offenses. The police had quite a few suspects on their list as the inquiry went on. In Nikki Verstappen's homicide case, sex offenders like Mark Hoffman and Michel Fournier were thought to be suspects. However, a comprehensive investigation cleared them, and they were never charged with his death. Peter de Vries learned about new methods for testing DNA science in 2004. The public was then notified, and he instructed the police to re-examine the blood found on Nikki Verstappen's apparel. Letters accusing themselves of killing Nikki were left on his memorial in Bronson in February 2005 by an unidentified individual. The letters were linked to a 36-year-old man by investigators. However, it was later discovered that the confession was fraudulent. The individual suffered from serious mental health problems and was a psychiatric patient. According to his therapist, he wrote the letters to attract attention. The individual who had used Nikki Verstappen's tomb was given a 2-week jail sentence. When it appeared that there was no chance left in February 2008, detectives revealed that foreign DNA had been discovered on Nikki's knickers and pajamas. All of the earlier suspects in the case had new tests performed, but the results showed no similarities to the discovered DNA. Still, Nikki's family was supportive. Although it may appear to be yet another dead end, the foreign DNA profile revelation suggested that there was evidence of a male having physical contact with Nikki Verstappen prior to his passing. The family of Nikki prayed and hoped the offender would be apprehended before he could harm anyone else. In order to provide the family with some closure, Nikki Verstappen's sister, Femke, who was in her 20s at the time, publicly pleaded with every guy in the neighborhood to take part in a DNA test in February 2010. Following the appeal, the police compiled a roster of more than 100 men. These soldiers were first sent to Camp Management Search Party. Of the 114 guys, 80 consented to give saliva samples. Despite the relatively strong turnout for the DNA analysis, Peter de Vries used the media once more to entice individuals to participate in the testing. Many of these males appeared to be afraid to give up their DNA samples out of concern that they would be discovered and prosecuted for previous crimes. Nevertheless, 40 more men came forward after Peter de Vries clarified that their DNAs would only be utilized in Nikki Verstappen's case. Even after a thorough examination of the recovered DNA samples, Nikki's clothes was not identified as matching the dent. Juz Barton died in February 2003, and his remains were unearthed for examination in a desperate search for the truth. Since Juz Barton had been the most likely suspect over the years, there was hope at that time. But many were taken aback when Juz Barton's DNA was discovered to differ from that on Nikki Verstappen's clothing. Nikki Verstappen's murder case was moved to a cold case team in the early months of February 2012. The fresh detectives went through every detail of Nikki's case file. Following that, they came upon a group of 1,500 men who were all connected to the area around the campsite where Nikki Verstappen was last seen. The people on the list were either camp staff, neighborhood residents, or sex criminals with official charges. But they were out of luck once more. The police were not easily defeated. In February 2017, they submitted a new request for government aid. They wanted more than 20,000 DNA samples to do a kinship study. As a result, only 15,000 volunteers actually took part in the end. But this DNA dragnet operation was the largest of its kind in Dutch history. It was a long shot, but the last one as there was nothing left to do. Large-scale DNA sweeping is an important effort, and it has raised a number of ethical concerns. If they had nothing to hide, most people think that collaborating was a no-brainer, and their DNA profile might help detectives find the child killer. All the males received letters from the authorities asking for fresh DNA samples. If they didn't respond, police would visit them at home in an effort to convince them to help. Josh Brecht, one of the men, was supposed to bring a sample, but he never did. When 2 police officers arrived at his house, he was not there. The man's family claims that he left for France in February 2012 and never came back. In April, Jos Breeze went missing, according to his family. Before the authorities could locate him and obtain his DNA, he had undoubtedly fled his house and disappeared. Because they were concerned about this man, the authorities' background to find out who he was. Jos Brecht was 35 years old when Nikki Verstappen was murdered. He lived around 12 miles away from the campsite with his mother and Simpelveld. He was an enthusiastic scout who also led camps on a regular basis. He had also worked as a childcare provider in Brunson for a few years. Even though he confessed to the offense, he was not found guilty in a 1985 case involving the sexual abuse of 2 boys, ages 10. His name was never placed to the list of sexual offenders, and he was only given a 2-year probationary period. That's why when all sex offenders were subjected to a DNA search by local police, He managed to avoid discovery. They never mentioned his name. Jos Bresch was in the vicinity of Nikki's disappearance on August 10, 1998. He was riding on a route near the crime scene when he was detained by police at midnight on Tuesday, August 11, 1998. Nikki Verstappen's body had just been found a few hours before the police encountered Jos Bresch, and Nikki's body was being taken from the campsite site to Maastricht for the autopsy when the police saw Jos Bresch. Jos Bresch told the police that he was delivering letters to Scout members because it was too hot to be out cycling during the day when they questioned him about why he was out at that time. The cops reasoned that the explanation made sense because it had been a very hot day. But he gave a different account when questioned later during the course of the investigation. The same month that Nikki Verstappen was killed, August 1998, saw the discovery of child pornography on his personal computer. However, Jos Brecht was only able to obtain one of the 15,000 DNA samples that were turned over to the authorities in February 2017. This sample showed a striking resemblance to the foreign DNA that was discovered on Nikki Verstappen. The DNA sample was from a family member of the person whose DNA was discovered on Nikki's clothing. That individual just so happened to be Jos Brecher's relative. Police were getting close to solving the case when they asked Jos Brecher's family if he had left behind a toothbrush or hairbrush so they could develop a DNA profile. His relatives gave the authorities support and some of his personal possessions. At last, after 2 excruciatingly long decades, all the hard work paid off. Beginning in June 2018, forensics established a 100 match between Nikki's pants and pajamas DNA and Jos Brecht's Statener. But in order to prevent alerting the criminal, detectives were asked to keep the new information to themselves. Now, the detectives launched a wide-ranging worldwide hunt for Jos Brecht. Jos Brecht was a survival specialist who led nature expeditions into the highlands in the Vosges mountain region of northern France, where his last known whereabouts was. Remember that he was a seasoned scout member with practical expertise. Jos Brecht had not used his phone or credit cards, so when he left the Vosges, nobody knew where he had gone. Police found that he had become more adept at survival and had started making plans to disappear and live off the grid. His online search history showed that he was well prepared, having studied little villages all throughout Europe in great detail, places Dutch news would not publish. Law officials said that asking the public for help was the only option to pull him out of his hiding place. At a news conference on August 22, 2018, it was disclosed that DNA samples from Jos Brecht's personal belongings matched the DNA found on Verstappen's clothing. They revealed his identity and age at the time. Because of Dutch privacy rules and the presumption that a person is innocent unless and until proven guilty, it's common practice to merely use a surname's initial letter. But this case was special because Jos Brecht had to be located with the help of law enforcement. The public appeal was successful because the week after the press conference, Jos Brecht was identified, and his whereabouts were reported to the police by a Dutch citizen in northern Spain who had seen his photo in the newspaper. Jos Brecht was residing in the northern Barcelona town of Castellterçol in a tent close to a community house. On August 26, 2018, 20 years after Nikki Verstappen passed away, Jos Brecht was placed under arrest. His identity was confirmed by the passport he was carrying when he was taken into custody. On September 6, 2018, he left the Netherlands and made his first court appearance in December of the same year. After Jos Brecht was arrested, Peter de Vries celebrated alongside the family of Nikki Verstappen. There was a great sense of success and relief. Jos Brecht had already admitted to child abuse and had been questioned in February 2001 about his presence near the crime site the night Nikki's body was found. "Yes, I can understand why you would want to speak with me," he answered, referring to his past run-ins with the law over child abuse. There was no investigation into this claim or collection of a DNA sample. Although Jos Brecht wasn't officially on the list of sexual offenders, he had unintentionally put himself on it. If only Jos Brecht had been thoroughly investigated by the police back then, this case would have been solved long ago. In Maastricht, the trial got underway in December 2018. Rather than murder, Jos Brecht was charged with manslaughter. The charge of manslaughter is less severe. Unlike in a murder case, there is insufficient evidence to establish that the murder was planned out beforehand. Jos Breck entered a not guilty plea in court and defended himself by claiming that his DNA was found on Nikki's clothing when he was out for a stroll at the camp area's edge and noticed something in the distance. When he went to investigate out of curiosity, he discovered Nikki's body. He claimed that because of his prior convictions, he had looked for signs of life, brushed leaves off the body, and then left without taking any more action. The prosecution countered that Nikki's body had 27 distinct locations where Jos Breck's DNA had been discovered, including his pants. Even yet, Jos Breck insisted on his innocence, claiming he had no idea how his DNA got onto Nikki's panties. Following his trial, Jos Breck was found guilty. On January 28, 2022, an appeal court declared him guilty of manslaughter and gave him a 16-year prison sentence. Even if the Versstappen family could have some answers, will they ever be satisfied? Their boy will never grow older, even as his friends do, because he will always be 11 years old. They are tormented by innumerable unsolved issues on a daily basis, like, would Nikki have grown up to fulfill his dream of becoming a professional soccer player? They have been hurt, and they have lost faith in humanity. Even though Femke Versstappen is an adult with a child of her own, she still follows her mother's tradition of lighting a candle for Nikki every day and having fresh flowers about the house. Thanks for watching. Natal King, a 46-year-old Eagleville, Pennsylvania photographer, was charged in March 2004 with killing 23-year-old porn actress and model Natal King, also known by her stage name Taylor Summers. Although Anthony Joseph Frederick was accused of murder, mishandling a corpse, and having a knife, he later told reporters he was innocent as he was being removed from the courtroom. Frederick was also accused of lying to detectives over Natal's death, according to District Attorney Bruce Castor. Before her body was found in what is described as a rugged and densely wooded location near the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia, Natal, a Canadian national, had been missing for more than 3 weeks. She had many knife wounds to her hands, neck, and chest, and her remains revealed that she had been subjected to extreme abuse. Her body had been wrapped in a background that looked like it belonged to a photographer. Evidently, Bruce Castor informed the reporters, she fought back against her assailant. Both the detectives and I think that she was killed by Anthony Frederick as a result of a fantasized sexual bondage. It seems that the reason for the argument between Frederick and Natal was because he could not provide her the $900 she was due for taking part in his shoot, despite the fact that many headlines state that the crime involved bondage. Jennifer Odum, 29, was also taken into custody shortly after Frederick was, and she was accused of lying to the police and obstructing their investigation. As Frederick's assistant, investigators stated that they thought she was complicit in helping to hide the murder. Frederick admitted to the detectives that on February 29, 2004, he shot 20 pictures of Natal and that he had given her the money she was due. After that, she vanished from sight. But Natal's roommates remember that the 23-year-old had called to tell that the photographer had grossed her out and that she would check in again in a few hours. That call never materialized. On March 5th, Natal's car was discovered near the photo studio. Her computer and bag remained inside. Subsequently, when Frederick's home was searched, duct tape, shackles, blood-stained tools, and a scribbled poetry with the words "cut with a knife, blood does flow," were discovered. It might bleed you out. Death is approaching slowly. Frederick didn't tell investigators the truth until July 2005. The 47-year-old was given a sentence of 24 to 51 years in prison in Montgomery County, Philadelphia, for fatally stabbing Natal at his photography studio. Frederick acknowledged that he had been unable to pay the 23-year-old and that an argument had ensued after a bondage-themed photo shoot, and then he fatally stabbed her. Frederick is said to have expressed regret to the family in court. Additionally, he begged the judge for a lighter punishment, saying that if Natal hadn't attacked him with a hunting knife, he would never have stabbed her. Frederick said that he had taken the knife from the 23-year-old and stabbed her with it. Her body was then wrapped up and disposed of in White Marsh Township by him. A few weeks later, it was discovered in a muddy ravine. William Nichols, the presiding judge, noted that Natal was discovered gagged and with a red ball in her mouth that was fastened to a leather strap that was fastened around her head, indicating that he did not accept Frederick's version of events. He questioned how they had gotten into a fight while the 23-year-old was being choked by a mouthpiece. Frederick agreed to cooperate with police in convicting his helper, Mikis, in exchange for a reduced sentence of third-degree murder and mistreatment of a corpse. D.A. Bruce Castor said that he probably would have been given a life sentence for first-degree murder if the case had gone to trial. "I'm more annoyed that we have to proceed in this way," he said to the In all the decades I have been doing this. "I have never witnessed a scenario where we had the lesser co-defendant holding out. We had to come to an arrangement with the more serious defendant in order to obtain the felonies against her. That, in my opinion, was a truly horrible outcome." Eventually, Mikis acknowledged her involvement in the murder, saying that she had assisted in wrapping and loading Natal's body into the vehicle. She had also mopped the blood off the photographic studio floor. In the end, she entered a guilty plea to multiple offenses, including misuse of a corpse and falsifying or interfering with tangible evidence. In addition to the 6 months she had already served, she was sentenced to 6 to 23 months in jail, 4 years of probation, and a $500 fine. Daniel King, Natal's father, told reporters that although justice was done in the courtroom, it was not done for us. Natal won't return as a result. To help pay for college, the 23-year-old had been working in the pornographic sector. Her father stated in court that she had aspirations of being a mother and a psychologist. If you're fascinated by true crime and enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up to stay updated on all our latest content. Moving on to the next case. Mildred and Stanley Zukowski. While fishing on the Westfield River in West Springfield on May 30, 1966, a father and his kids spotted something larger than a typical fish drifting just below the water surface. They cast their fishing net out of curiosity to make sure it wasn't a fish. They were shocked to find a dead body there. Betty Lou Zukowski, Tin, who had been missing for a few days, was the body in question. The police were notified by the fishermen promptly, and they hurried to the crime scene to look into the situation. Mildred and Stanley Zukowski had reported their daughter missing to the Chicopee Police Department at the time. Then the police called them to come determine whether their daughter, who had gone missing, was buried there. Being a parent's worst nightmare is having to bury their own child. Mildred and Stanley hoped Betty Lou wouldn't be the one discovered dead in the river and prayed for her safety. Unfortunately, it didn't look like their luck would hold out since when they arrived at the crime site, they found that Betty Lou Zukowski, their daughter, was actually dead. Betty Lou Zukowski, a 10-year-old Catholic schoolgirl, departed her family's home on 293 Front Street in Chicopee, Massachusetts at approximately 6 o'clock in the evening on Thursday, May 26, 1966, or roughly 57 years ago, following a phone call from someone she claimed to be her girlfriend. She was meant to get together and have an ice cream cone with this girlfriend. Her parents allowed her to go because they were accustomed to their daughter frequently leaving the house. They had no idea that would be their daughter's final glimpse of her alive. Betty Lou Zukowski got ready to go. She was wearing blue jeans, a jacket, white trainers, and a green shirt with checks. She also brought her $2 with her. Betty Lou's parents, Stanley and Mildred Zukowski, reported daughter missing to the Chicopee Police Department at approximately 11:15 p.m. that evening after she did not come home. They instructed the police, for some reason, not to report her missing in public for several hours. According to other sources, they were probably accustomed to mom being gone from home for such a long time. But in their haste to locate her, the Chicopee Police Department promptly sent out an all-state alarm. It was eventually revealed to them that Betty Lou's girlfriend was a figment of her imagination. After 3 days of fruitless searching, Betty Lou's damaged and mud-covered body was tragically discovered 4 days later on May 30, 1966, a Memorial Day, off the coast of West Springfield by 2 young men fishing in the Westfield River. Her cause of death was identified as several blunt force injuries to the head, a fractured skull, and terminal drowning based on post-mortem evidence. When Betty Lou entered the Westfield River, she was still alive and had not experienced any sexual assault. She was beaten, according to the authorities, within 15 minutes of her drowning. Following the discovery of Betty Lou's remains, the West Springfield Police Department and the Chicopee Police Department collaborated on a combined homicide investigation. At first, the entire detective bureau of each of these police departments was assigned to the case. There was also involvement from the Massachusetts State Police and the Hampton County District Attorney's Office. There was a comprehensive search along the shore where Betty Lou's body was discovered, looking for clues. Divers also combed the river for any useful information that might identify the offender. Not even the murder weapon was discovered. After that, the detective spoke with Betty Lou's relatives, acquaintances, and fellow students to find out who she might have run across at the time of her abduction and subsequent murder. Her pals in Chicopee had informed the police that she enjoyed exploring the caverns carved out of the riverbank behind the Chicopee Electric Light Company. However, despite searching all the locations she enjoyed visiting, the police were unable to locate her killer. Betty Lou was described as a loose girl by the police and media at the time of her death. She was brilliant, friendly, witty, adventurous, vivacious, and sassy. According to her pals, they said that at the age of 10, she had colored her dark brown hair blonde. She frequently wore cross-shaped earrings, got her ears pierced, and applied makeup. Her close acquaintances claimed that she was occasionally spotted hanging out in their automobiles, mostly with teenage lads. Some argued that, at 10 years old, Betty Lou was undoubtedly eager to grow up and that, because of her free spirit, she may have trusted an older person who would later take advantage of her and murder her. Investigators were informed by Betty Lou's pal that she had previously claimed to be seeing a boy by the name of Ralph. Ralph back in 1966, based on her friend's account. He was a Caucasian man in his 17th or 18th year of life with medium complexion, brown eyes, and black hair. He frequently wore glasses with black frames. He was reported to weigh between 125 pounds and 135 pounds and to be 5 feet 5. He either drove a dark green Chevrolet sedan or a Chevrolet with a white or light blue top and a dark blue bottom. But the cops found out that there was no such person named Ralph. Either Ralph had lied to Betty Lou about his name, or Betty Lou had lied to Ralph about his real identity. Since Betty Lou would not have left her house after receiving the call on Thursday night, the police assumed that she knew the person who killed her. Investigators say she rode in a car driven by someone she knew, met up with this individual, and ended up in West Springfield. Nevertheless, there were no noteworthy leads in the days that followed the finding of her remains. Betty Lou Zukowski was buried on June 2, 1966, the day she turned 11 years old. Her funeral was performed with great mass honors at Holy Name Church in Chicopee. Pallbearers included a number of her 5th grade classmates from the Valentine School in Chicopee. Her entire class, along with her teacher, attended her burial. Deeply loved and full of spirit was Betty Lou. Detectives used the accounts of 2 witnesses to create a sketch of the suspect 1 week after Betty Lou's remains were discovered. The final person to see Betty Lou alive, only hours before her death on May 26, 1966, was one of these witnesses. But this drawing resembled Ralph's description. The sketch was heavily covered in local publications at the time it was later made available to the public. It provided various leads for the detectives, but none of them helped them identify the murderer. After all leads were exhausted, the case was put on hold for years. However, Betty Lou's homicide case was revived in February 2019 following the establishment of the Unresolved Crimes Unit of the Hampton District Attorney's Office. Subsequently, authorities learned that in November of 1997, Donald Mars was considered a suspect when West Springfield Police Department investigators obtained information connecting him to Betty Lou's slang from a number of sources. But since there wasn't enough proof to link him to the crime, he was never taken into custody. 25 years later, in 2022, Betty Lou's case attracted a lot of attention, and Donald Mars was charged with first-degree murder on Tuesday, November 1, 2022, in connection with Betty Lou Zukowski's death. On November 2, 2022, Donald Mars was brought into jail after a warrant for his arrest was issued. Although the evidence connecting him to the murder has not yet been made public, Hampton District Attorney Anthony Gugliuni did note during the news conference that important remarks made contributed to Donald Mars' arrest. It's either that someone saw something and came clean, or Donald Mars most likely involved himself in the questioning. Donald Mars was descended from a prominent Chicopee family. With 5 sons, Mars Heating and Service was owned by his father, Roger Mars. At least 2 of Roger Mars' sons participated in the military, and he was a Korean War veteran. Given that Donald Mars was residing in a Bedford Veterans Administration facility at the time of his arrest, it is likely that he was one of those sons serving in the military. It seems that Donald Mars had committed a good deal of crimes throughout his life. Donald Mars was found guilty in 1995 of 2 counts of forceful child rape and 3 counts of indecent assault and battery on a minor under the age of 14, according to the state sex offender registry board. He is categorized as a level 3 sexual offender, meaning that further offenses are most likely to come from him. After being found guilty in May of 1995, he received a 2.5-year prison sentence. He was released from prison in June of 1997 and placed on probation. He received a 5 to 7-year sentence at Cedar Junction for breaking the terms of his probation. Following his convictions, Donald Mars was found to be sexually dangerous and placed under civil commitment at the Bridgewater Treatment Center in Massachusetts from 1994 to February 2015. Eventually, he was placed in a Bedford, Massachusetts hospital run by the Veterans Administration, where he was staying prior to his arrest. Donald Mars was 17 years old when Betty Lou was murdered, and the drawing of him that Betty Lou's friends created based on her description of Ralph resembles Donald's high school yearbook photo. Furthermore, Donald Mars had some knowledge of the location where Betty Lou's body was discovered at the time of the murder. His family used to spend time at his grandparents' home on 102 Woodmont Street in West Springfield, according to an archive of newspapers. On Christmas, Thanksgiving, and other occasions they spent time at their house. The murder scene at the end of Dewey Street is 4 minutes' drive from this address. The 73-year-old Donald Mars was charged with first-degree murder for the death of Betty Lou and was placed under indictment by Hampton Superior Court. When asked to make his plea in a Zoom-conducted court, Donald Mars pleaded not guilty, appearing as though he would cry. He was urged to be detained without the ability to post bail after his criminal past was detailed. Donald Mars seemed to take exception at this and expressed disdain. The pretrial meeting for this case was postponed until May 1, 2023. Regretfully, Betty Lou's parents passed away in the 1980s. It was reported that Mildred Zukowski, who passed away at the age of 61, fell out of the window of her chamber. According to some accounts, she killed herself because she was presumably unable to bear the loss of her only child, Betty Lou Zukowski. Stanley Zukowski passed away at the age of 64 from unspecified causes a year later. The Zukowski family has no known living siblings. But after Donald Mars was apprehended at last, District Attorney Anthony Gugliuni of Hampton has this to say: "Numerous unsolved cold cases have lingered for a very long time without the offenders being apprehended. However, there is now a ray of hope for the families of murder victims, as most of these cases are being solved with integrity, providing them with closure and allowing their loved ones to finally rest in peace." Moving on to the next case. Sharion Jarvis, previously identified as Jane Doe of Walker County. While traveling along Interstate 45 on November 1, 1980, a truck driver passing by the Sam Houston National Forest close to Huntsville, Texas, saw something unusual. He instantly realized what he was seeing when he pulled over to the shoulder of the road. A teenage girl's nude body laying face down in the grass only 20 feet away. The cops were called to the site at approximately 9:20 a.m. Beyond that, the adolescent could not be identified. She was a female between the ages of 14 and 18. Before her body was found, she had been dead for around 6 hours, and she was only wearing a pair of shoes and a piece of jewelry. A smoky brown or blue glass stone rested on a slender gold chain that hung around her neck, and a pair of red high-heeled sandals were perched slightly farther away. They had brown straps and were composed of leather. There were no further clothes or accessories on Jane Doe's body or at the scene where her body was discovered. She had her ears pierced, but she didn't have any jewelry on show. The medical examiner for Harris County performed Jane Doe's autopsy. The young girl had light brown hair that was 10 inches long, hazel eyes, and was described as being between 5'6" and 105 to a pound 20 in weight. Her hair was notably reddish-colored, although it showed no indications of dye or other coloring procedures. Her fingernails were naked, but her toenails were painted a pale pink color. The Emmy said that Jane Doe appeared to be well-fed and that, given that she had received dental care and hadn't gone without food, it was likely that she came from a middle-class family. Asphyxia by ligature strangulation was found to be Jane Doe's cause of death, and it was concluded that her demise had been brutal. It was believed that a pair of tights had been used to strangle her. Her vaginal cavity contained pieces of her pants and those same tights. She was sexually raped with a blunt object before she died. Therefore, it was believed that this was done to stop her from bleeding while she was being moved from the crime scene to the disposal location. Moreover, Jane Doe had sustained a beating. Her right shoulder had a deep bite mark on it, and her face was very swollen, especially around her mouth and eyes. Since she lacked identification, authorities understood they would have a difficult time finding her companion. They quickly made an appeal to the public for information in an attempt to find out where she had been and whether she was traveling with someone before her death. They soon had a hit. The day before Jane Doe was killed, several witnesses saw her. Among these witnesses were 2 workers from the hitch and post truck stop, as well as the manager of a golf service station, who all saw her dressed in a dirty yellow pullover, a white knit sweatshirt with big pockets, and blue pants. She was also seen wearing the red sandals that were discovered at the landfill. Witness statements state that at approximately 6:30 on the evening of October 31st, Jane Doe showed up at the Gulf petrol station looking a little disheveled. She had just gotten out of a blue Chevrolet Caprice, 1970, 1973, or 1974, with a light-colored top, driven by a white man. The adolescent was in the petrol station and wanted instructions to the Ellis Prison Farm in Walker County, Texas, run by the Texas Department of Corrections. These days, people just call these places the Ellis units. After receiving instructions, Jane Doe set out once more, but this time she went on foot. Later on, Sam Houston Avenue northbound walking was observed by her. She was later spotted at the Interstate 45 truck stop at Hitch and Post. She inquired about instructions to the Ellis unit once more. There, she said, a buddy was meeting her. That night, a waitress asked the young girl if her parents knew where she was and drew a map for her. "Who cares?" Jane Doe supposedly said to her. She had stated earlier in their talk that she was from either Rockport, Texas, or Aransas Pass, Texas, and that she was 19 years old. The waitress reported to the authorities that she thought the teenager was on the run. This was Jane Doe's last known movement. There are still unanswered issues in the case about how she wound up dead on the side of Interstate 45 and who killed her. When authorities discovered she had been trying to enter Ellis units, they questioned prisoners and staff members, but no one identified her picture. Only one prisoner reportedly matched the young girl's age, but they were never put in contact. After that, investigators went to Rockport and Aransas Pass in search of girls who had gone missing and fit Jane Doe's description. In an attempt to find her identity, they even visited local schools, but they left without finding anything. Walker County on January 16, 1981, Jane Doe was laid to rest in Oakwood Cemetery in Huntsville, Texas. Morris Memorials, a tiny family-run firm in Huntsville, donated her tombstone. The case of Jane Doe remained unopened until 1999, when her bones were dug up for forensic analysis and DNA collection. Authorities also declared at this time that they thought she was probably between 14, 16, and 15 years old. But at this point, things moved slowly and eventually the case became cold once more. The case was revisited in 2015. The high-heeled sandals that were discovered at the site were subjected to DNA testing. However, the results have never been made public. In December of the same year, a picture of a young white girl who appeared to be about 14 years old and 5 feet 4 inches tall became viral online. She resembled Jane Doe in certain ways. The image was provided by 2 siblings who remembered seeing the little child in the summer of 1980 at a Beeville, Texas motel. They recalled that the child lived with a couple and went by Kathleen, possibly spelled with a K or a C. She may have originated in Corpus Christi, Texas. They said the child wanted to meet a friend who was incarcerated in Texas State Prison in Sugar Land. This girl is not Jane Doe. It has been established. Journalist Michael Hargraves postulated in the years following Jane Doe's demise that a woman was the attacker, citing the use of tools for the sexual assault and the absence of semen from Jane Doe's body or the crime scene. In addition, he said that males who commit sexual offenses are more prone to bite someone because it gives them a chance to live out their crimes again. Since it enables them to relive their misdeeds, a lot of offenders do this. It has been suggested, nevertheless, that Jane Doe might have had on more jewelry in addition to her necklace. Therefore, another item might have been taken as a memento. Her clothes has also never been found, and it's unclear what happened to it. There is also a belief regarding Jane Doe's case that it is connected to the case of Deborah Jackson, a.k.a. Orange Socks, who was another victim who was recently identified. Deborah was killed in Georgetown, Texas on October 30th or 31, 1979, 1 year before Jane Doe. Not only was she found hours after her murder, but she had also been left nude and strangled to death. Deborah is 23 older than Jane Doe, but this doesn't necessarily mean there isn't a relationship. Henry Lee Lucas, the infamous serial killer, confessed to almost 600 more killings while he was incarcerated, leading many to disbelieve his confession despite the fact that he was found guilty of the crime and claimed responsibility for her death. When his teeth were compared to Jane Doe's shoulder bite mark, they were discovered to be mismatched. In February 2001, Lucas passed away in prison. According to theories put up in 2017, Jane Doe was the victim of a serial killer who killed 3 other women in 1980 and dumped their bodies near Interstate 45. All of these victims were considered high risk, although only half of them have been identified or died from strangulation. 2 more unnamed women, both of them black. One is in the 20 to 30 age range. She may be Asian in descent and was discovered in Houston on October 15, 1980. She passed just a few months before she was discovered. In December 1980, the other woman was discovered in Houston, under the bridge. Her age is thought to be between 16 and 26. The Walker County Sheriff's Office and Othram Incorporated, joined in 2020, should make an effort to use genetic genealogy to identify Jane Doe. It was thought by both sides that this would facilitate the case's advancement. Othram Incorporated eventually succeeded in extracting DNA from the young child, and after multiple efforts they were able to build her genetic profile. The sheriff's office revealed in the open on November 9, 2021 that Jane Doe had a name. Sharion Jarvis, a 14-year-old who had fled Stillwater, Minnesota in the spring of 1980, was identified. Sherry, who was born on March 9, 1966, was referred to as Toddy by her pals. Her family mentioned that she especially loved being around kids and animals, as well as horseback riding. She had been taken from her family's care and put in a state home in early 1980, while she was still 13 years old, as a result of her truancy. A couple with 5 of their own children owned and ran the house. They would accept up to 18 juveniles at a time who were in the juvenile court system and were between the ages of 12 and 18. 6 adults were always keeping an eye on the children. When Sherry was scheduled to appear in court in March 1980 at the Washington County Courthouse, she fled with 2 females who were not named, and they later chose to go back home. Meanwhile, Sherry turned her back and walked away. Her final correspondence with her family dates back to August of that year, when she wrote a letter to her mother from Denver, Colorado, expressing her dissatisfaction with being under state care and threatening to stay away until she was at least 18 or 21. Sherry had attended Forest Lake, Minnesota's Central Junior High School. Her family also retained the same phone number after she vanished in case she ever wanted to get in touch. They did make an effort to look for her, both alone and with the help of a professional detective, but they were never successful. In January 2018, her mother Carrie passed away at the age of 78, and in June 2019, her father Don Jarvis Sr. passed away at the age of 78. Although Sherry's siblings are relieved to get some closure at last, they still hope that her killer will eventually be brought to justice. Investigators said they've received a ton of new tips since Sherry was identified. They are optimistic that a few of the leads may materialize. The reason behind Sherry's attempt to contact the Ellis unit has never been revealed. Theories suggest that she may have been slain by a truck driver who allowed her to sleep in his cab, or by someone she was hitchhiking with. Notably, her body was found next to a truck stop, leading many to propose that this is where the murder occurred. Finding Sharion Jarvis is only half the fight. Her murderer is still on the loose. You can reach out to the Walker County Sheriff's Office at 936-435-2400 if you know anything regarding her case. Laura Hobbs. 2 girls rode their bikes to the park and vanished, setting off a chain of events that seemed almost impossible to believe. From the start, the story played out like a detective thriller with an astonishing plot. As the situation developed, it grew more perplexing until all the mysteries finally merged into a single answer. Laura Hobbs was born on September 25, 1996, in Texas. Later, her parents had 3 sons, but their relationship eventually ended in separation. Laura's mother moved with the children to the quiet town of Zion, Illinois. She quickly grew fond of the area, as her maternal grandparents lived there, and she soon formed new friendships. Additionally, Zion was located along the shores of Lake Michigan, a place she loved visiting with her family. In February, when Laura was 8 years old, her father chose to reunite with his wife and become part of the children's lives again. He moved from Texas to live with the family. A few months later, on Sunday, May 8th, they celebrated Mother's Day. Laura, her brothers, and their parents spent the day at the lake, enjoying the occasion and flying kites. They had a wonderful time, and later, Laura wanted to take a walk with her best friend, 9-year-old Crystal. The 2 girls attended the same school and lived nearby. When Laura moved to Zion, they quickly bonded and became inseparable, spending nearly all their free time together. They would visit each other's homes, play near their houses, and ride their bikes. Whenever Laura's mother didn't allow her to go out, Crystal would come to her window, and they would chat. That day, they decided to take their bikes and ride to the park, which was just a few hundred yards from their homes. The girls often visited the park since it was nearby and featured a long bike trail. Despite their young age, their parents felt comfortable letting them go, as both were familiar with the area, and serious crimes in the town were extremely rare. They left around 3 p.m., planning to return in time for dinner. However, as the hours passed, their parents began to grow concerned. By 7 p.m., when Laura and Crystal still hadn't come home, their families decided to head to the park to call them back. To their shock, the girls were nowhere to be found. They walked along the bike path calling their names, but there was no response. Soon, other family members joined in the search, growing more anxious with each passing moment. The search continued throughout the park and into the surrounding neighborhood streets, as family members desperately hoped to find the girls. Hours passed with no sign of them, and as darkness began to set in, concern turned to fear. By 9 p.m., the parents realized that something may have happened to Laura and Crystal, contacting them to contact the police. Law enforcement quickly joined the search efforts, enlisting the help of volunteer organizations, search dogs, and several dozen volunteers. As word spread about the missing girls, local residents also stepped in to assist. The police concentrated their search in the park, as that was where the girls had planned to go. Speaking with children who lived along the route from their homes to the park, officers confirmed that Laura and Crystal had passed by, stopping briefly to chat before continuing on their way. Meanwhile, investigators went door to door in the neighborhood, hoping someone had seen the girls that evening. They also began distributing flyers with details about their disappearance, determined to gather any possible leads. With each passing hour, the fear that something terrible had happened to the girls grew stronger. Night had fallen, and despite the town-wide search, there was no sign of Laura or Crystal. The search continued relentlessly, stretching into the early morning hours. By around 4:30 a.m., the police decided to pause briefly, but Laura's father and grandfather refused to stop. Determined to find the girls, they headed back to the park and decided to split up to cover more ground. At around 6 a.m., as the first light of dawn appeared, Laura's grandfather suddenly heard a cry and rushed toward the sound. He found Laura's father, who stood frozen in shock. He had discovered the bodies of Laura and Crystal. The girls lay hidden off the bike path, concealed by thick undergrowth. Laura's father immediately realized they were dead, as their bodies were covered in blood and showed severe injuries. Without hesitation, he called the police, who arrived swiftly to the scene. After examining the bodies, forensic experts concluded that the girls had died from multiple stab wounds, likely inflicted with a knife. Laura had suffered 20 such injuries, while Crystal had 11. The horrifying news sent shockwaves through the small town, where violent crimes were almost unheard of. Now, residents were confronted with the grim reality that an unknown attacker had brutally murdered 2 young girls just a few hundred meters from their homes. Determined to find the perpetrator, the police focused all their efforts on the investigation. Their initial suspicions fell on Laura's father, Jerry. Authorities found it suspicious that he had discovered the bodies alone, despite the park having already been searched by officers and volunteers. As they looked deeper into his past, they uncovered a troubling criminal history. Jerry had been involved in various offenses, ranging from drug-related charges in his youth to violent assaults. One particularly alarming incident had occurred in February 2001, which ultimately led to his wife taking the children and moving to another state. At the time, while they were still living in Texas, an argument between Jerry and his wife had spiraled out of control. The incident took place in front of their home when 3 passing men noticed the heated argument and stepped in, believing Jerry's wife was in danger. Enraged by their interference, Jerry ran to grab a chainsaw and began chasing them. The men eventually managed to subdue him and hold him down until the police arrived. As a result, Jerry was charged, and a year later he was sentenced to 10 years of probation. Part of the conditions required him to check in regularly with his probation officer, but he failed to attend one of these appointments. Because of this violation, his probation was revoked, and he was sentenced to 18 months in prison. He was released just a few weeks before the tragic deaths of his daughter and her friend, and had traveled to Zion almost immediately after his release. To the police, his history of aggressive behavior made him a strong suspect. However, they lacked concrete evidence or a clear motive. Instead, they invited him in for questioning. Jerry agreed to go to the station, where investigators gradually began pressing him about his possible involvement. During more than 20 hours of questioning, Jerry initially denied any in the deaths of his daughter and her friend. He repeatedly insisted that he had nothing to do with it, claiming that after he and his wife realized Laura hadn't returned home, he went out searching for her. He said he continued looking until he eventually found the girls' bodies in the park. However, as the interrogation went on, his story began to change. Under relentless pressure from detectives, Jerry eventually started to confess. He claimed that on that evening, he had indeed gone to the park and seen Laura with Crystal. Angry that his daughter had gone out without permission, he scolded her and demanded that she come home with him. When Laura refused, he grabbed her arm in an attempt to take her back. She resisted, and Crystal intervened, insisting that he leave Laura alone. According to Jerry, Crystal then pulled out a small knife from her pocket and pointed it at him. Jerry flew in a rage. He seized the knife and repeatedly stabbed both girls before leaving their bodies in the overgrown section of the park and walking away. The following morning, he allegedly discovered the bodies and reported it to the police, hoping to divert suspicion away from himself. During his confession, Jerry was in tears, but he signed his admission statement and repeated it on camera. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community, leaving the girls' families devastated. No one could have imagined that Laura's own father was responsible for the horrific crime. However, his wife later told the police that she had always been aware of his violent tendencies, given his history of criminal offenses. Despite his confession, Jerry was arrested and held in prison as he awaited trial. Soon after, the prosecutor announced plans to seek the death penalty. However, as preparations for the trial dragged on, unexpected developments in the case began to emerge. Jerry was assigned a lawyer, and he abruptly changed his stance, now claiming he had nothing to do with the murders. He insisted that his confession had been coerced, given under immense pressure from detectives who had interrogated him for over 20 hours. He further alleged that the officers had threatened both him and his family, and had even subjected him to physical mistreatment. At the time, he had gone more than 2 days without sleep, and was in a deeply distressed state after discovering his daughter's body, struggling to cope with his grief. According to Jerry, the police told him that if he simply confessed to the murders, they would let him go and allow him to rest. He claimed that had essentially fed him the details of the crime, constructing a plausible scenario and pressuring him to repeat it. Once they had crafted a coherent narrative, they wrote it down for him to sign and instructed him to read it on camera. His attorney immediately requested a case review, but the request was quickly denied. The prosecution maintained that Jerry had confessed voluntarily and had reaffirmed his statement on video. Nevertheless, after retracting his confession, he had to go through a full-fledged trial with a jury, which prolonged his wait for several years. Following this, Jerry's lawyer discovered some significant details. Initially, he knew that there wasn't a single real piece of evidence against his client, and decided to focus on searching for any leads. Here, he found out that the medical examiners had not even thoroughly examined the bodies of the girls. They had conducted all the standard procedures like taking swabs, collecting debris from under the girls' fingernails, and so on. However, after storing these samples in the refrigerator, no one had considered analyzing their contents. The lawyer pushed to have all these pieces of evidence examined in an independent laboratory. The prosecution tried to obstruct his efforts, but he succeeded in February 2008. The examinations were finally conducted and there was a rather unexpected twist. It turned out that Laura's body had several different DNA samples on it. There was foreign skin under her fingernails and male semen found on her clothes and in 3 places on her body. Simple analysis revealed that none of this belonged to Laura's father. It all pointed to a completely different man. This discovery unequivocally indicated that Laura had been sexually assaulted. As for Crystal, they did not find any foreign DNA on her body, but no one doubted that she was killed by the same person. Jerry's lawyer immediately requested his client's release from prison and a dismissal of all charges. However, District Prosecutor refused to acknowledge the new evidence, claiming that it meant nothing. In his opinion, the presence of foreign DNA on Laura's body could have been entirely coincidental. He argued that young couples regularly visited that park for intimate encounters, and he believed that this was why male semen ended up on the girl's body, possibly from the grass or bushes. Even the fact that some biological samples were found inside the victim's body didn't seem to faze him. Despite the absurdity of this version, Jerry remained in prison, awaiting the start of his trial. Nevertheless, the lawyer managed to get the DNA sample entered into the FBI's database. But there were no matches. All he could do was wait and hope that the perpetrator would be caught sooner or later, because there was no hope for reasonableness from the prosecution's side in Jerry's case. Let's fast forward 4 years and miles away from Zion. A 20-year-old woman named Amanda Snell, who had recently joined the military, lived in the military base in Arlington, Virginia. She decided to enlist because there were many military members in her family. Alongside her service, she occasionally helped a local church near the base. There, she taught children with autism and other developmental differences. Amanda quickly realized that she wanted to pursue this professionally and planned to get the necessary education after her military service. On July 13, 2009, she didn't report for duty, immediately raising concerns among her fellow service members. They went to a room, knocked on the door, but received no response. They discovered that the door was unlocked and entered. The room was impeccably tidy. The bed was made, and her belongings were neatly in place. But Amanda was nowhere to be found. Only after they opened the closet did they come across a horrifying sight. Amanda's lifeless body lay in an unnatural position with a pillowcase over her head. Initially, the medical examiners couldn't determine the cause of death, but they later concluded that Amanda died of suffocation. Her death had occurred over a day before her body was discovered. There were no signs of trauma on Amanda's body, nor was there any evidence of sexual assault. The only notable detail investigators discovered was that her laptop and tablet were missing from her room. When speaking with Amanda's parents, detectives learned an interesting fact. She suffered from severe headaches, and when the pain became unbearable, she would sometimes retreat to a dark room and cover her head with a pillowcase. Given that Amanda was found in her closet with a pillowcase over her head, investigators considered the possibility that her death had been a tragic accident. However, they didn't rule out the possibility of murder. Near the entrance of her closet, they found a men's shoe print, but they were unable to determine who it belonged to. With no definitive answers, investigation remained open as detectives continued searching for a potential suspect. Then, in February 2010, a 26-year-old woman from Arlington exited a metro station and began walking toward her boyfriend's home. As she made her way down the street, a stranger suddenly approached her, brandished her gun, and ordered her to get into his car. Despite the assailant grabbing her arm and brandishing a knife, the woman managed to break free. She threw her purse as a distraction and fled toward her boyfriend's house. Upon hearing her cries, he and his friends rushed onto the street and called the police. By the time they did, the assailant had already fled. Nevertheless, the woman could provide a detailed description of his appearance. She also remembered the model of his car, a beige Dodge Durango. Based on the victim's description, a composite sketch of the suspect was created, and the police began their search. 2 weeks later, on February 27th, 2 women from Arlington were returning home after spending the evening with France. When they stood at their doorstep, an unknown man approached from behind, brandishing a gun, and demanded their wallets. After the women informed him they had no money, the assailant forced them inside the house and bound their hands. At one point he left the room, and one of the women managed to free her hands. She grabbed a phone and dialed 911. However, the man swiftly returned, snatched the phone, and smashed it against the wall. Subsequently, he grabbed one of the women, took her out to his car, and drove away. After covering some distance, he raped her, taped her head with duct tape, and strangled her with a scarf until she lost consciousness. She later regained consciousness in the snow by the side of the road when passers-by found her. She was taken to the hospital, where the police promptly arrived. The woman provided them with a description of the attacker and mentioned the model of his car, a beige Dodge Durango. Remarkably, just 2 hours before this attack, another woman had reported to the police. She told them that a man matching the same description and driving the same type of car had approached her on the street. He had attempted to coerce her into his vehicle, but she had used her stun gun on him and managed to escape. Investigators realized that they were dealing with a serial and highly dangerous criminal right in their midst. They focused their efforts on the vehicle, as it was easier to trace through databases. The police visited all owners of such cars, and soon they got lucky. During the inspection of one of these vehicles, they discovered a student ID belonging to the same woman who had been left to die in the snow, along with her earring. Inside the car, they also found the same type of tape used to bind her head and a stun gun. The owner of the car turned out to be a 21-year-old named Jorge Avila Torres, who was serving in the military at the very base where Amanda Snell's body had been found several months earlier. Moreover, he lived in the same building as her, just a few floors below. During the search of his room, investigators found a pistol he had purchased less than a month ago, along with numerous rounds of ammunition. On his computer, they discovered a significant amount of explicit videos depicting violence and cruelty. Some of these videos featured women who were unconscious. Photos of Torres, along with pictures of other men, was shown to all 3 women who had been attacked. They all unanimously identified him. His face well because during the assaults, he didn't even attempt to conceal it. Following this, Torres was arrested and placed in custody pending trial. Investigators suspected him of kidnapping 1 woman and assaulting 2 others, which seemed likely given the evidence. However, they faced another problem when they began to suspect Torres of Amanda's murder. There wasn't a single piece of evidence linking him to the crime. So, detectives devised a clever plan. They planted an informant in his cell, someone willing to wear a wire and engage him in conversation. Surprisingly, this tactic worked remarkably fast. Within a week, Torres started confessing to his crimes. He openly boasted about killing Amanda, stating he did it just because the opportunity presented itself. He added that he did it for the adrenaline and provided a detailed account of how he placed her body in the closet. Torres also mentioned that after the murder, he had to meticulously clean her room to erase any traces. However, unknowingly, he left behind a piece of evidence during the cleanup. The criminal revealed to his cellmate that he had sexually assaulted the victim on her bed using contraception. After moving her to the closet, Torres made her bed but removed the top sheet. However, he left the mattress pad, which the police immediately sent to the laboratory. Their experts found a tiny sample of male semen that matched Torres's DNA perfectly. Furthermore, Torres let slip to his informant that he had a pair of Nike sneakers that he kept in his car. Crime scene analysts seized the shoes and compared the sole pattern to the footprint found outside Amanda's closet. The sole pattern was an exact match. As a result, Torres was formally charged with murder, and he remained in custody awaiting trial. Meanwhile, a sample of his DNA had been uploaded to the FBI's database, and now we return to Zion. Several weeks after the sample was added to the database, local investigators got a perfect match between Torres's DNA and the semen samples found on Laura Hobbs's body. What followed was even more astonishing. It turned out that Torres was originally from Zion and was friends with the older brother of the second murdered girl, Crystal. This connection confirmed that both Laura and Crystal knew Torres, a fact corroborated by other kids in the area. At the time of the girls' deaths, Torres was just 16, and the police hadn't considered him a suspect at all. They were solely focused on Laura's father, who had spent 5 years in jail awaiting trial. Once the DNA match was found, Jerry's attorney demanded his client's immediate release and the dropping of all charges. This time the prosecutor couldn't argue against it, as the discovery of Torres's semen on Laura's body eliminated the possibility of her father's involvement. After his release, Jerry announced his intention to sue the police and authorities for coercing a false confession from him and making him spend 5 years of imprisonment. They quickly realized they had no chance of winning this case. And in the event of a loss, they'd be held accountable for their misconduct and incompetence. So they offered him a settlement, which he accepted, receiving nearly $8 million. As for Torres, the legal process in Virginia 4 years after his arrest. He refused to admit guilt, but the jury unanimously found him guilty. He was sentenced to death for Amanda's murder, and for the attempted abduction of 2 other women, and the kidnapping of a third, he received 5 life sentences, plus 168 years in prison. Immediately after this, he was extradited to Illinois, where the trial for the murders of Laura and Crystal began. Initially, he denied his guilt, and his lawyer tried to argue that the semen found on the victim wasn't enough to prove his client's guilt. However, Torres was eventually presented with a deal. He was already facing the death penalty, and even if that were delayed for decades, as it often happens, he would never walk free. So, the criminal agreed to confess to the murders in exchange for an additional 100 years in prison and a transfer to a different facility, as he felt his life was in danger at his current one. The terms of the deal didn't require him to reveal all the details. It was sufficient for him to admit to the killings. As a result, Torres remains behind bars, awaiting the execution that has yet to occur. As for the police officers who coerced Jerry into signing a false confession, none of them faced any consequences. Jerry himself couldn't fully return to a normal life. He began using drugs and was arrested for resisting arrest, subsequently escaping from custody and receiving a 2-year prison sentence. He also couldn't reunite with his family and chose to live in Texas. After his release, Jerry gave an interview in which he admitted that the coerced confession had irreparably damaged his life. When asked why he had agreed to confess, he responded, "I found my daughter dead. They didn't even need to try to break me. I was already broken." Ultimately, both the local police and the county prosecutor's office faced well-deserved criticism from the national media and the public. Had they not fixated on a single suspect and instead conducted a thorough investigation, they would have had a far greater chance of catching the real perpetrator much sooner. Instead, their tunnel vision inadvertently allowed the killer to take another woman's life and attack 3 more victims. And those are just the cases that came to light. Moving on to the next case. Jennifer Renee Odum. 12-year-old Jennifer Renee Odum was a 7th grader at Thomas E. Whiteman Middle School in Wesley Chapel, Florida, in 1993. She played the clarinet in the school band and was also a talented barefoot water skier, often reaching the top of the human pyramid in tournaments. Jennifer was born on August 25, 1980, as the eldest daughter of Renee Converse and her stepfather Clark Converse. She had a younger sister, 9-year-old Jessica and Odum, and was the granddaughter of Jim and Margie Denny. The family lived in St. Joseph, a small community near Dade City, Florida. Jennifer and Jessica shared a deep bond, playing with their rabbit named Beanie, riding four-wheelers, building forts, and swimming in the creek behind their house on the family's 15-acre property. Jennifer was known for her love of the outdoors, spending plenty of time outside, which gave her a tan and kept her fit. She had a special bond with her Springer Spaniel, Gypsy. On the crisp morning of Friday, February 19, 1993, Jennifer wore her white jeans, a white turtleneck, and a red cashmere sweater, a gift from her grandmother. Her shoulder-length chestnut hair framed her face as she prepared for school. After lacing up her black boots, Jennifer and her mother drove the 200 yards up their winding lime rock driveway to wait for the school bus by their mailbox. Jennifer climbed onto the bus and took her usual spot on the back seat, so she and her mother could see each other until Renee, following behind, turned left to head to work. After school at around 3 p.m., Jennifer stepped off her school bus, waved goodbye to her friends, and started walking the short 200 yards to her home. At about 4 p.m., Jennifer's sister arrived at their home from school to find it locked and unable to enter. She then called their mother to tell her that her big sister was not home yet. Renee Converse then realized Jennifer must not have made it home. Jennifer's mother called her best friend, Michelle, who confirmed that she had seen Jennifer exit the bus and start walking home. Realizing something was terribly wrong, Jennifer's mother immediately contacted the police. Within hours, deputies initiated a large-scale search. A group of approximately 400 volunteers joined the effort, covering around 60 square miles of countryside. Family, friends, neighbors, and other volunteers scoured the area. Law enforcement brought in police dogs to comb through the rolling groves, pastures, and wooded areas surrounding the small Pasco County town of Dade City. All local law enforcement agencies were on the lookout for a blue truck that had been seen near the scene. Some of Jennifer's classmates recalled seeing an older light blue pickup truck slowly trailing Jennifer as she walked down the road. The children noted that the truck had a silver-painted rear bumper, not chrome, along with a trailer hitch that had wires hanging from it and pipes or a ladder in the back. The driver was described as a white male in his 40s with shoulder-length brown hair. The blue truck was the focus of the search parties as investigators believed that the driver may have been involved in the disappearance of Jennifer. As a last resort to find the truck, the FBI as well as Hernando and Pasco County Sheriff's personnel worked from a dock and boathouse as drivers searched Lake Jovita for the vehicle. 6 days after Jennifer vanished, on Thursday, February 25th, a man and a woman searching an abandoned orange grove about 10 miles north of Jennifer's school bus stop found her badly decomposed nude body. Her body was found near a horse trail off Powell Road south of Brooksville, amid a cluster of pine trees in the orange grove. She was found viciously assaulted and suffered blunt force trauma to her head. Detectives believe that Jennifer likely lost her life in the woods shortly after her disappearance. Hernando County Sheriff, El Ninhuiz, remarked, "We are not exactly sure how long her abductor kept her captive or when exactly the slaying took place, but we are relatively confident it took place in that field." He continued, "Every one of us, including those in law enforcement, can look at Jennifer as our niece, our sister, our granddaughter, and realize that it is a tragedy beyond tragedy." Despite extensive searches, Jennifer's clothing was never found, nor was the blue truck or its driver. As Jennifer's family focused on her funeral arrangements, country music star Vince Gill was scheduled to perform at the local Strawberry Festival on Monday, March 1, 1993. Jennifer's stepfather, Clark Converse, shared that the girls had been excited for weeks to see Gill perform and hoped they could get his autograph. Before the concert, Clark and Jessica went to the festival to honor Jennifer's wish for him to autograph a photo from a previous concert where the girls had posed with him. Between shows, festival vice president Joe Newsom brought the 3 snapshots to Gill, who was eating dinner. Clark Converse had asked that Gill sign 1 photo for Jessica, 1 for Jennifer, and 1 for both girls. Newsom recalled, "I told Gill this young lady had been slayed and her dad was outside. Gil replied that he remembered hearing about the incident. He, who also had a young daughter, autographed the photos, writing on one to Jennifer, "May God be with you," as both Gil and Newsom wept. Gil then went to the night's second show. Before singing the last song, he told the audience about Jennifer. "I'm going to try to get through this the best I can," Gil said, his voice cracking. He sang his Grammy-winning hit, "I Still Believe in You," and dedicated it to Jennifer, whose life had been tragically taken. Midway through the song, with tears streaming down his face, Gil asked the crowd to help him finish. Nearly 15,000 voices joined in. Radio personality Jeff Moore, who stood backstage, observed the scene with tears in his own eyes. "It was heart-ripping," he said afterward. Unfortunately, despite the emotional tribute, no one in the community provided investigators with useful information, and Jennifer's case remained unsolved. In a chilling twist, just 13 months before Jennifer's abduction, on January 16, 1992, a 17-year-old girl had been kidnapped as she got off a school bus in north-central Pasco County. She was found in a pool of blood behind an abandoned house, brutally attacked, assaulted, and beaten. Sheriff Mean, who has reported that she suffered significant head and skull injuries. Miraculously, she survived, but her life was forever altered, leaving her paralyzed on her left side. Nin, who has emphasized that she was a former honor roll student and track and field participant, leading an ordinary life and not engaged in any high-risk behavior. Law enforcement had collected DNA from the crime scene, and detectives noted similarities between the attacks on Jennifer and the unnamed girl. They suspected the cases may be connected. Both victims were adolescent girls who were abducted after getting off of the school bus in Pasco County, taken to a remote field, assaulted, and abandoned with the belief they will succumb to their injuries. The other victim was found just a few miles from where Jennifer's body was found. After a series of blind alleys, the police called upon psychic Nancy Mayer, 16 months after the incident, to assist in finding the person responsible for what happened. Nancy Meyer is a psychic from Pennsylvania who has been working with police around the country for decades. According to Nancy, she had consulted and offered critical clues more than 80% of the time. Nancy believed that two men were involved in taking Jennifer's life. She described them as white muscular mechanics, and she said one may be a smoker with a heavy cough. The crime scene photographs were classified. Therefore, Nancy Mayer was not allowed to see it. Despite this, she was able to visualize two men in detail. She was taken to the site where Jennifer's body was found. Nancy pointed out that there were belongings in a nearby area that had not yet been discovered. She was able to describe several of Jennifer's items that were still missing, including her cousin's clarinet case with the letters LO on them. She continued to give information about the perpetrators in hope of solving the case. Detective Carlos Douglas of the Hernando County Sheriff's Office said, "Nancy Mayer was extremely accurate on some things that led us to look in other areas that we had not thought of. So we obtained a lot of information from what she had to offer." On December 2, 1994, Jennifer's unsolved case was aired on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries on national TV. After the show aired, more than 50 phone tips and even more investigative leads from around the country arrived by mail at the Hernando County Sheriff's Office. A spokesman of the Sheriff's Office said the show did for us what we wanted it to do. It got us some more exposure. Despite the new exposure, former Hernando County Sheriff's Major Gary Zorn Smith, who oversaw the investigation in its early years, said the investigators were stumped. He said there was a strong possibility the crime would go unsolved. "And what's even worse is that if we solve it, it may take another crime to do it," he said at the time. Approximately 2 years after Jennifer's body was found, on Thursday, January 5, 1995, a couple hunting for scrap metal in a rural area of Hernando County discovered Jennifer's missing book bag and clarinet case. It was found several miles from the location of her body. Police were able to lift fingerprints from her backpack and clarinet case from what is believed to be the person responsible. Unfortunately, there was never a hit in the database for a suspect matching these fingerprints. Over the years, the case garnered national attention and haunted the Tampa Bay region. $1,000 in reward money offered for tips went unclaimed. Detectives logged tens of 1,000 of hours chasing leads. Jennifer's family waited for news as the years turned to decades. Jennifer's mother, Renee Converse, wondered if it was somebody Jennifer knew. Clark Converse, Jennifer's stepfather, added, "There is a real chance that the person who did it is somebody we have contact with. If they catch someone, we're going to be thrown into the spotlight. Learning how to deal with a trial and confronting this person is going to throw us to square one in learning to deal with this." Renee said she cries a bit more each year. "The reality is that Jennifer is gone and will never be in our lives again. Nothing is going to change that." She also said that the family is thankful for what they do know. "We are blessed that we have this much closure. We are not looking for her. We know where she is. It is going to be a bittersweet finale." She could still picture her 12-year-old daughter, slim and sun-kissed, waving goodbye out the back window of the Pasco County school bus. It was the last time she would see her brown-eyed firstborn girl. Renee recounts the last words being spoken between the two as "I love you." The couple said they have done everything possible to cooperate in finding Jennifer Slayer. They wanted the person found so that no one else got hurt. On Monday, February 19, 2007, the St. Petersburg Times reported that it marked 14 years since the unsolved abduction and subsequent slaying of Jennifer. In that same year, members of Hernando County Crime Stoppers handed out special playing cards to inmates at the Hernando County Detention Center. Each card featured a brief description of an unsolved case from around the state and a hotline number. Jennifer's card was the Queen of Diamonds and featured 2 color photos. A website has been set up by the Hernando Sheriff's Office with pictures and information about Jennifer. A slideshow was also put together with photos of Jennifer set to a mournful soundtrack. Hernando County Detective George Lloyd Grenlater headed the cold case unit. He was armed with the latest DNA technology and a disturbing theory. "I believe that there is probably one person, if not more, that would know who is responsible for this," he said. He also believed that person could be a family member or ex-spouse, either protecting the perpetrator or too afraid to come forward. "I think the reason people do not want to get involved is they may not want to sit there and have to testify against that individual." Over the years, a couple of anonymous tips came in that led investigators to believe that there are several people out there with more information, and the investigators wanted them to come forward. They tried various methods of generating new leads, from billboards and a $20,000 reward to a documentary on national TV. Investigators amassed some 1,000 pieces of evidence, took thousands of tips, and conducted hundreds of interviews over time to try to determine who took Jennifer's life. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children reached out to the sheriff's office and offered to scan every piece of paper in Jennifer's case, so it will be readily available. It was more than 75,000 pieces of paper. During all the investigations, there were clues, including the fingerprints on Jennifer's clarinet case and backpack. There were also suspects. Serial offender Frank Thaniel Potts was a possible suspect. He assaulted a 10-year-old girl in Lakeland in 1993. At the time of the slaying, he was working on a construction site in Pasco County and owned a blue pickup truck, which he allegedly later dismantled. Authorities were unable to link him to Jennifer's case. However, another possible suspect was Walter Ducharme, who lived in the area at the time of the slaying. His ex-wife claimed that he was responsible for it. However, her testimony was inconsistent. When the case against him was presented to a grand jury, he was not indicted. He was no longer believed to be involved in the case. In February 2015, Detective George Lundgren was contacted by Pasco County Sheriff Chris Nacco. According to him, new technology had led to a solid lead in the 1992 case in which the teenage girl was found alive. It was the case investigators believed was linked to Jennifer's. The odds of finding another match, Nacco said, was 1 in 7.7, a number with 30 zeros. Lloyd Gren commented, "I think DNA is going to be a big part of Jennifer's case, as it is with any of the old cases, because items were collected. It is just now that the technology has advanced." The biological evidence found in the investigation of the 1992 case was tested before February 2015, and detectives got a full DNA profile. Investigators used a DNA procedure known as familial searching, which allows law enforcement to find a suspect by comparing male DNA left at the scene with that of family members. The shortfall of a standard DNA search is that a suspect's genetic fingerprint must be on file in the offender database for law enforcement to make a match. Araf Ninhu said until February 2015, there were no leads on that particular piece of DNA. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement compared the DNA to local DNA to see if there were any close matches, which would be a family member. The sheriff said they found the DNA matched that of Jeffrey Crum, who was in jail at the time. Investigators then obtained DNA samples from Crum's brother, father, and grandfather. A direct comparison between the DNA found on the victim and that of Crum's father found a match. Investigators concluded that Jeffrey Crum took the girl from the 1992 case by the arm and led her behind the abandoned house where he hit her head with a blunt object so hard it crushed part of her skull and caused her to lose part of her brain, leaving her paralyzed on the one side. This then finally led to the arrest of Jeffrey Crum, 53 years old at the time, in connection to the 1992 case. It was Crum's arrest in this case, authorities said, that made him a person of interest, reinvigorating an investigation in Jennifer's case. Sheriff El Ninja said when Crum was implicated in the 1992 case, he quickly, almost instantaneously became our #1 suspect in Jennifer's case because of the similarities. He also noted that over the years there were suspects, but Crum was not on that list, so he came out of left field in February 2015. In February 2018, on the 25th anniversary of her daughter's demise, Jennifer's mother told the Times that she and other family members tried to have faith that her case would eventually be solved. I think the investigators would have done anything in the world to have solved this case. In February 2019, Crum was sentenced to life in prison for the crime he committed in 1992, leaving his victim partly paralyzed. The victim's aunt spoke in court during the sentencing hearing, recounting the lifelong damage he had inflicted. Her aunt said her life stopped that day. She also mentioned Jennifer. A year later, a young lady, Jennifer Odum, was slayed, she said, and that brought back so much different things that today, the perpetrator still has not been caught. The arrest and sentence of Crum gave Detective Lloyd Grant a new resolve, and Jennifer's family new hope that the person responsible will be caught. Detectives then began an intensive investigation and interviewed everyone they could find for the next several years that may have been associated with Crum around the time Jennifer was kidnapped. This information was turned over to the state attorney, and the facts and circumstances were turned over to a grand jury. On July 27, 2023, a month shy of what would have been Jennifer's 43rd birthday, officials announced that they had finally made an arrest in the case and that prosecutors would seek capital punishment against the accused. State Attorney Bill Glass made the announcement during a press conference. This was just after the Hernando County Sheriff's Office announced that it has charged the 61-year-old Jeffrey Norman Crum with the kidnapping, assault, and slaying of Jennifer 30 years before. Glass also said, "I have confidence that we have the right person, and we have the right aggravators in this particular case to treat it as a capital punishment case. This is every parent's nightmare. This is the thing that keeps parents up at night worried about their children." Detective George Loigren, who had spent years investigating Jennifer's case, said shock is probably the best word to describe the reaction of Jennifer's family when he told them about the arrest. He said he did it quickly because I did not want to get emotional. It is a lot for them to take in and absorb, and I can imagine it is going to take some time before it really sinks in. According to Sheriff Neen, who is every viable lead for the past 30 years, including those that came from the Pasco County Sheriff's Office or the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, or private citizens were investigated thoroughly. He added the investigation never stopped. Hundreds of items were tested and retested every time new technology came out in the hope of finding a smoking gun to solve this case. The sheriff added literally countless detectives and sworn law enforcement personnel and civilian and tipsters have had a hand in this investigation. The minute Crum was identified as a suspect in the case, Detective Lundgren went to work putting a mosaic together or a puzzle. And I can tell you, other than a conviction in a previous case, there was no other piece of the puzzle. That was a big piece of the puzzle. Every other piece of the puzzle that got us to this point were tiny little fragments that gave the state attorney and the grand jury enough confidence to indict Crum. Sheriff Mianuis also said that they are searching for additional victims. Authorities fear Crum may be responsible for other crimes. A picture of him from 1993 was released, asking that anyone who recognized him from the 1980s-1990s to contact Sheriff Ninhuas. We urge anyone who had interactions with this individual, has information on other crimes he may have committed, and or may have themselves been a victim of Jeffrey Crumb to reach out to the Hernando County Sheriff's Office and speak to our cold case unit. Despite keeping a lot of information close to the vest, authorities did say that in 1992, Crumb worked in construction as a drywall installer and lived on Somerset Lane in Spring Hill, the Pasco County area where Jennifer was abducted from. His residence was about 21 miles from the place where Jennifer was last seen and 12 miles from where her body was found. Officials also say at that time he drove a blue truck. During Thursday, July press conference, Sheriff Min Weiss kept reiterating Crumb was not on the investigators' radar until the past few years. Records showed Crumb has a significant history of convictions for violent crime. The sheriff said Crumb had been arrested in the early 1980s for armed robbery in Hillsborough County. In 1985, he was charged with kidnapping, assault, and false imprisonment in Hillsborough County. He was arrested by Tampa police in 1987 for carrying a concealed weapon. In 1988, he was caught again carrying a concealed weapon and was charged with aggravated assault. In 1998, he was arrested for domestic violence in Hernando County 3 times. In February 2001, he was arrested for violation of probation in Hillsborough County. He was arrested a few years later for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon in Hernando County. In 2015, he was arrested in Pasco County for aggravated assault on a child under the age of 12. Sheriff Ninhu has stated, he is a bad individual who enjoyed violence. Crumb is already serving 2 life sentences for the assault and kidnapping case out of Pasco County that was prosecuted around February 2015. He is currently in the Hernando County Jail. Judge Kurt E. Hitzman ordered him to be held without bond and appointed a public defender to represent him. Communities in Pasco and Hernando counties were left shaken after Jennifer Odum's abduction and slaying. When news of the arrest was announced, many residents shared their thoughts and feelings. Gene Cameron, the general manager at Papa Joe's Italian restaurant in Brooksville, recalled how the community was deeply affected by Jennifer's disappearance. We all remember hearing about her disappearance, Jennifer's, and about the blue truck. Everyone was on alert, looking for answers. I think the bottom line was finding out who did it and getting him off the streets so that another family doesn't have to suffer. She said, I really feel like the whole community was tormented until they found out the answer. Joseph Gyraton, the owner of Papa Joe's, expressed his anger as a parent, recalling how furious he was when he learned someone could do such a thing to a child and leave her abandoned. Back then, 30 years ago, as a parent, I was very angry that someone could do something like that to a child and then leave her there in the middle of nowhere, he said. Jessica Ellis, who went to Whiteman Middle School with Jennifer and played in the same clarinet section, remembered Jennifer as always being kind. We saw each other a lot. We weren't really close friends, but we knew a lot of the same people. We rode the school bus every day, and I just remember her always being nice to me and everyone else who knew her on the bus. She added, now, a lot of us are parents ourselves, and the fact that anyone could do something like this to a child makes me hold my 5-year-old a lot tighter now. Grief and fear lingered in the community in the years following Jennifer's tragic death, but the arrest of Crumb provided a sense of closure for many.